Good Yontev, L'chaim, L'shon Teva, B'limud Chassidus, B'darkei Chassidus, Tikosevu, V'sichosemu. That is the traditional bracha, as the Rebbe begins Hayom Yom. It's 223 years now since Tov Kuf Nun Tes, the year 1798, when the Alter Rebbe was imprisoned, and then 53 days later was freed and liberated on Yutes Kislev. So the first thing I remember once in Farbrengen, at the beginning of Yutes Kislev Farbrengen, he started with Shechiyonu v'kimonu v'giyonu l'zman hazeh. And just even b'derech hateva, the mere fact, if you think about Jewish life for the last 223 years, that alone is a miracle that we're even sitting here. How many different nisyonos, besides the Alter Rebbe's imprisonment and then liberation, but then everything that came after that, and then the Mittler Rebbe, and Tzemach Tzedek, and Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Rashab, and the Frierdiker Rebbe. Just go through each one of them is a whole story of literally near Sarkonis Nefoshes, and that we could be sitting here in freedom in the year 2021, Tavshin Pei Beis, and talk about it, is itself a miracle. Baruch Shas and Nisim. I remember once hearing from Professor Baranover. He says when we were in Riga and in Moscow, they would Farbrengen Yutes Kislev, and we're talking not so long ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And he said we had to, we were in a basement hiding, and we had to alternate. People should stand by the window in case there's a mossad or someone, an informer coming. And we would Farbrengen, he said, with a little table. It wasn't even a table. It was like a bunch of boxes with barely any food, and l'chaim, with all the danger. And he said, but we felt that we held up the world because we knew the rest of the world was free, and we were the last so-called bastion of holding up the world on a Chassidus of Farbrengen Yutes Kislev. So we stand here and we are in this freedom. As the Rebbe says, in many ways this is a deeper golus than their golus that was back then, because today it's called Evdim Be'eretz Ashur. You know, when you're comfortable, the enemy is not outside. It's not Nazis, Yimach Shemam, or communists, or the Tsar, or the pogroms, or the Tsar's soldiers that arrested the Alter Rebbe. Today the enemy is inside, because we have no manias v'yikuvim, Baruch Hashem, nobody's watching and informing on us. So it's harder sometimes to appreciate it when things are easy. So we have to remember that Yutes Kislev still has Mesiras Nefesh today. It's a different type of Mesiras Nefesh. It's being able to commit ourselves to understanding why we should give our lives for Chassidus. Thank God today it doesn't mean physical life. It means Mesiras HaRatzon. So if I'm bringing like this, really has to come away with not just talking about the whole parsha and what it means, but also practically. The Rebbe would say, if we don't come away with achlotis tevis, real resolutions, how we can change the world with Chassidus, then in many ways we're not really living up to what the legacy that was given to us. So that's the real goal. You know, there's the Rebbe brings, the Frierdiker Rebbe brings the Behagdomet to Kunter Samayon. There's talks about the parsha when the Rebbe Rashab in Tofrei Samach announced that Yutes Kislev is Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. Now that was a very dramatic statement to say. You know, to say something is a Rosh Hashanah, Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha. So when the Rebbe Rashab wrote the famous letter then, and it went around, so he sent the Frierdiker Rebbe, his son, to go check out what the reaction is by the different kehillas. So he came back and said there's a lot of controversy, you know, to the point that in the Litvische world, they were saying, someone went over to, I'm trying to remember, it was Rab Chaim Ezer, yeah. And Chaim Ezer was the leader of the Litvische world then, So there was a Rav went over to him and said, "Nu, zeh was tut zur Bachsidim." They give him to another Rosh Hashanah. They come to another Yom Tov. Now there's Daled Rosh Hashanah heim, as that's what the Mishnah says, and now they've added a fifth one. Yutas Kislev. He was making like Litzonis, so to speak. So Chaim Ezer said, "Nu, bazei kum zu, ba uns wird weniger." That's what he said. That by the Chassidim, it increases, and by us, it's getting weaker. So I saw a zettel from the Rebbe in 1967. Someone wrote to the Rebbe from Boston. Rabbi Krinsky was Rabbi Yudel's brother, lived in Boston. And they wrote to the Rebbe, a Psura Teva, that in the summer months, Rabbi Yasha Ber Soloveitchik, the Rav, would teach, in the summer he would teach Shabbos in his bungalow colony, he would teach a few hours, 3 hours, Ashir and Nigla. But in the month of El, the last half hour, he would teach L'Kutei Torah, Pasha Re'eh, the Maimorim of El, Rabbi Yoshe Ber. So the Rebbe, in Ksav Yad, in his writing, his handwriting, he writes that you should give over to Rabbi Yoshe Ber, Kemuvan Le B'Shmi, not my name, that there's Eira Torah of the Tzemach Tzedek has Agos on L'Kutei Torah, and just to give him more background, Tzemach Tzedek would ground everything in sources, in Nigla and in other places. And then Beis, the Rebbe writes, says, Rei Kunter Semayan. So the Rebbe writes, Rei Kunter Semayan, he writes exactly what page, I think page 23, Tur Beis, because that's what it is, the second column. Bazei Kumtsu V'chulu, Ukemuvun Kana Hepech. That's what the Rebbe writes. Kana Hepech. So when we saw it, I saw it for the first time, I was wondering what's the Kana Hepech. You could teach two ways. That here, but Pashti you could teach that then is Zevad Veinike, but now that Rabbi Yoshe Ber is learning the L'Kutei Torah, Kumtsu Bazei. Or you could say, Kana Hepech, that Bazei Kumtsu, and what's Tutzach Ba'unz, and learning the L'Kutei Torah. I'm not going to say Maskana, but that's what the Rebbe wrote. So it's interesting, the fact of the matter is, we all know the Torah Sabal Shem Tov, Tzom Lecha Nafshi, Kam Lecha Psari, Kain B'Kedesh Chazisicha, that the Kain should be read Halavai B'Kedesh Chazisicha. Halavai, that when we're in Kedesh, in a holy place, and there's no Tzemoyin, there's no Eretz Siya V'Oyev, Halavai, we should have the same passion and the same thirst as when we have it when we are in a desolate land. Because when things are comfortable, as I said before, what we call in English apathy settles in, indifference, complacency. For those that want the Yiddish, it's gleich guilty. I know all the words of apathy. I mastered the art. So there's gleich giltigkeit is the word in Yiddish. And in Hebrew, it's adishut. What does it mean? It means there's always tomorrow. There's no rush. There's no sense of urgency. When is there urgency? When you're desperate, when you're running for your life. So when things, the bracha of comfort also has another side to it, which is the ability to. So the Baal Shem Tov understood that, and Baal Shem Tov understood that and said, "Halavai b'kedesh chazisicha." Halavai, that when things are beautiful, we should have the same passion like we have when we feel thirsty and parched land and an arid desert and desolate land. I remember once being up by Farbrengen. It was a Kislev Farbrengen many years ago, and it was with it was not with necessarily, let's call it cultural chassidim. I use the word cultural, kavana, but I'm not going to explain it right now. Just this was a different culture, and one of them asked the question, "What did the Rebbe come to contribute? What did the Rebbe contribute?" Now, for every chassidim, it's like the question is completely ludicrous. I mean, he contributed everything, right? But sometimes when you're challenged by someone that doesn't grow up with and takes for granted everything you have to come up with a real answer. So it'd be interesting to hear if we went around the table. I'm not going to do that now, and ask everybody, tell me in simple English, what did the Rebbe contribute? And not just to you. to Yiddishkeit. So I said, there's many things that Rebbe, of course, contributed, both in Teira and Aveda, in Milas Chasadim. Many people say the Rebbe, social activism, a revolution of shluchim and chabaras all over the world. No one ever did that. So I said, I just felt it was the right thing to say. I said the Rebbe declared war on apathy. He declared war on the comforts of our lives. I always wondered why the Rebbe never went. All the Rabbeim, what was called a dacha, they went on dacha. Dacha was vacation. Now, Kimuv and the Rabbeim didn't go on vacation. They went to be Mavad and Tzutzes, but they did travel. And the Rebbe insisted, never. When the Rebbe's mother asked him, why didn't you go? Oh, take a week, a day, or whatever. The Rebbe said, I still can't repay the time when we drove up to camp in 1960, Tavshin Chav. And then, half humorously, the Rebbe said, Ich fordere zweimal auf Chedish, auf dem Feld, that twice a month, the Rebbe goes to the oil. It's called the Feld. It's green grass. So it's somewhat of called vacation. I wouldn't call it vacation exactly, but but why? Why was the Rebbe so insistent? 24/7, always on call. There was no such thing as 1 second of relaxing. I'd like to challenge anyone to find any letter or zettel or sicha or yechidus where the Rebbe gives anyone the room that you could rest for a day, right away. Finish the project, next project. So it could be because the clip of our time is apathy. It's called leisure. We have a lot of free time. And the Rebbe wanted to go to war against it. Every generation has its klipa. So the Rebbe did not leave room, what the Rebbe calls Evdim be'eretz Ashur. In Eretz Mitzrayim, it's only Nedachim, the Golos. Aniyas creates, we're pushed aside. But in Eretz Ashur, Ashur from the word Osher with an aleph, prosperity, success, that creates a certain element of kaltkeit. There's always tomorrow. I mentioned there's a yechidus I saw in Tovshin Chav Daled. Tovshin Chav Daled, someone wrote up a short yechidus, or short excerpt of the yechidus, I should say. And the Rebbe says the following words: As the Eberster, the Gem Eden Allen Nisyanis, the Jews went through all tests. The test of Aniyas, poverty, Yisurim, afflictions, the test of other tests. And then the Rebbe says, Unista is the less than Nisayon. Now is given the last test, the Nisayon von Freiheit, freedom. The Rebbe said these words: Der Eberste sagt Eden, Natach Freiheit, und lassen wir sehen, wel Mashiach. Here's freedom, and let's see whether you'll want Mashiach. B'chmona l'tzlan, when you're in a concentration camp, or you're under the gun, obviously you want Mashiach, you're desperate. But when you're comfortable, we want Mashiach, but it's not like you can sleep another night peacefully. I remember once meeting a journalist. It was in Israel, and we met he wanted to see Jewish life. He was an American journalist. I said, come on Friday afternoon it's called an area called Geula. I wanted to show him how people are running to the mikveh and eating cholent and the whole Jewish Friday afternoon culture. And he was a smart guy, and he knew Hebrew a bit. So he said to me, what did you call this community here? I said, this is called Geula. He says, if this is Geula, what does Golos look like? So it was an interesting take. The Rebbe went to war against the Evdim Be'eretz Ashur, that even though tonight, for example, we can all go to sleep, and tomorrow, because no one's pushing us to do anything, but no, it's not the way of a chassid, it's not the way of anyone that was trained by the Rebbe, that we are always on call, and we don't take anything for granted. And even though it's hard, because what's pushing us? Where's the tzomalacha when things are going, you're pretty comfortable? So, everyone has to find that way. Maybe that's why we come together in a Farbrengen, to wake each other up and not let anyone sleep. Me and Shleim have forged a partnership. He wakes me up, I wake him up, right? And that's what we need to do. We do Isha Sechiv Yazeru. It says in the Cholso, we make a achlota together, then each person is, you feel responsible to another. You make a achlota yourself, it's very easy to forget. So if a Farbrengen like this has to result in making the Rebbe and the Rabbeim proud, Alter Rebbe sat in prison for a reason. Agmas Nefesh was in order that we today, 223 years later, should do something with Chassidus that lives up to the Mesiras Nefesh that the Alter Rebbe and all the Rabbeim had. And this great gift, the Chem de Gnuza, the Evan Yokar, the most precious stone in the king's crown that the Moshe Alter Rebbe gives, that was crushed in order to save the child that is sick and comatose, that maybe a drop of water will go in through the clenched lips, the clenched teeth of this child, which is us. That was Kedai, the whole pouring out all Chassidus, which is Primis HaTeirah, with all the nisenas that would bring. You know, maybe people abusing it or taking it for granted. All for you and I right here. No matter what matzav you're in, even if you're in a matzav of ruchnis, that's like the Ben Chela, Chassidus is here to not just revive us, but to transform us. And through us, transforming everyone around us. The fact is, the matter is that Chassidus is given to us because it has the power to address every challenge and issue in life. Alter Rebbe says in Akdama Tanya that all the eitzes ba'avedus Hashem are here. And just in case you don't think he's serious, he says, and if you don't find the answer, go to the Gedalim Shebe'ir and ask them. And they should not prave shifla shel sheker, and they should share and show. This is who we are. Whether it's a Kail Yungalite here, or it's others from the community, or anywhere where we may be, we are charged with a mission. 8 billion people on this planet, most don't even know about this shlichus, and we were given this shlichus. So, forget about what happened yesterday and last year and 20 years ago and 30 years ago. Right now, there's a job to be done. The Geula Amitis Vashlema is not here in the fullest sense of the word, so no one can say, okay, we did the job. So we have a real mission to accomplish. And from my point of view, sitting at this Kislev and not talk about it on that level would be really amiss. We would not be doing justice to what is expected of us. And we were given all these keiches, tremendous keiches. So we'll talk about that more, of course, throughout the evening. But I wanted to say l'chaim to each of you. It's unbelievable schus that we, Ashenu Matev Chalkeinu, that we have the schus, which is not by our effort and not by your choice, what family you're born into, what community you're born into, to have the schus to have access to the Rebbe, through the Rebbe, to all the Rebbeim, and to Chassidus is a schus. And we have to earn it and show that we deserve it. And that's by using it, if you look at what the Rabbeim did most of the day, they were either teaching or writing Chassidus. That means they felt that was the single most important thing they could do for us. They could have easily said, I'll take Yechidus all day. Counsel people, talk to people. They had Yechidus. But that was not the majority. The majority is writing, they're leaving us volumes and volumes. So we have this Eitzer, we have this treasure, and now it's our job is to translate it and to communicate it to ourselves, to our families, to our communities. And as the Rebbe made it very clear, that the Chassidus is Teimer Chaim Zachu, a taste of Teirasha Shel Mashiach. When you learn Chassidus, that means living and thinking and speaking Mashiachdik. You're talking about a Lakus. That's what Chassidus is. It tells you what it means to be a godly person, what it means to create a godly world, what it means to make a Dira B'Tachtenim. That's what Chassidus is, Be'etzem. So the more you learn it, the more you live by it, the more we actually become Mashiachdik, which is, that's why it's not just a Be'eifen's Guli, it's Siba Mesubav. The more Mashiachdik you are, the more you create the Mashiachdik environment around you. So the Eibishter should help us that, we're small people, but we're anonis al gaba anok. We stand on the shoulders of giants before us. And yes, 223 years, it's an unbelievable schus that we could sit here and honor the Alter Rebbe in this Yom HaGeula Shalei, this Yom HaSimcha Shalei, which, as we know, is not just a redemption from a prison, but a redemption from the very challenge, whether he's doing the right thing in spreading Chassidus. So the best way to celebrate Yutas Kislev is spreading Chassidus. That's why he sat in prison for. And that's the most direct way to do so. So may each of us put our heads together and figure out ways to do it, and be zeicha from this geula to go straight into the geula amitis v'ashlema with the Rebbe, with all the Rabbeim. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim. There's the famous story with the Alter Rebbe where he said that there was a point in his life where he came to a crossroad. Should he go to Vilna to learn more Nigla de Torah, or to go to Mezritch, where there they'll teach him how to daven? And essentially he said, learning he already knew how to learn. He can move in with all humility. But davening, he did not yet learn how to. So he went to Mezritch. And as they say, that has made all the difference. So people ask the question, first of all, Alter Rebbe knew how to daven, but Pashtus also. We're not talking about a small man here. So both davening and learning, you can always grow in both of them. So what did he actually learn in Mezritch? And ultimately, how did it contribute to Chassidus and to us? So I remember in the Tov Shem Aleph, with the Kviyas that year, Simchas Torah was Friday. So the Rebbe would have a Farbrengen Thursday night before a Kofis, and then Friday before by Lichtzin, short Farbrengen. And then Shabbos afternoon, 1:30, as you always, Shabbos Bereshis. Simchas Torah went right into Shabbos Bereshis. And then another Farbrengen, Shabbos afternoon, like an hour before the Shkia. Or an hour before the Tzeis Chachov, right before the Shkia. And that would go through the night, and then the Rebbe would wash by that, and then that's when there was the benching and Havdalah, and afterwards Keshel Brach. So just as an aside, it was the most difficult kfiyas for Chayzrim and Manichim, because you had to remember 4 Farbrengens before you could even write down one word, because you had Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. But I remember the Farbrengen, Shabbos Bereshis, the first Farbrengen, that ended like maybe 4:30, and then there was a small break, and then the Rebbe came back down and washed the final Farbrengen. So at the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was very Simchas Torah Ruach. The Rebbe was very evgelegt, as they say. And he told a story. It's a famous story, but the Rebbe said it as with the whole Harchove. The story goes with the time of the Maggid, that one of the Maggid's friends, Yedidim, when they were young, they would learn together, came to visit Mezritch, and he came to see the Maggid, his old friend, so to speak, and colleague. So he came for davening Shachris, daven with the minyan. The minyan finished, everyone left, the Maggid was still davening. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour, an hour, and 2 hours. I'm not sure if we know exactly how long, but it was long. He was waiting patiently, and he was he was in awe. So when the Maggid finally finished davening, he said, Shalom Aleichem. They reunited after many years. So he says to the Maggid, he says, in his ball, he says, we learned together Kabbalah, Kavonas Atfilah, and you're davening for hours and hours. I daven with the minyan, and we finished. In other words, what's the secret of your Arichas Atfilah here? So the Maggid responded. The Rebbe told the whole story. He said to him, what do you do for Parnasa? So he said, he goes twice a year to the Yirid, to the marketplace in Leipzig. He spends time there, he buys material, and then he comes back, brings it home, and his wife and children sell it the rest of the year to the local merchants in the local towns. And that's how he makes his living. So the Maggid says to him, how much time do you spend when you go? He says, it's a journey. You have to travel, stay there, spend time in the market. So it could be 3 weeks, 4 weeks a year. So the Maggid says to him, I don't understand. Why don't you just stay home? You don't have to have all the tircha, Tiltula Gavra and everything. Close your eyes and be mizbein and meditate about how you're traveling to Leipzig and how you're buying the material and how you come back and you sell it. So it says to the Maggid, you're battling. You're like, how do you say battling in English? I'm not really sure. You're out of touch with the physical reality. He says, why? So he says, because I need the scheda. It's not just a matter of being contemplating on it. The scheda, you got to go and have to take the time to get there and buy the material and so on. So the Maggid said the same thing in davening. Tefillah is sulam mutzav arza. It's a journey. It's not just sitting and davening. It's a journey up a ladder, and you're traveling miles and miles. Beruchnis. So if you want the scheda, it takes time. You can't knock it off in a half hour, an hour. That's what the Maggid said. And the Rebbe told us it was at the end of the Farbrengen Azay. The Rebbe connected it, but it was I remember when the Rebbe said in the Farbrengen, it was very, you could see the Rebbe was reliving it And in our generation, I don't like to use the word the lost art of prayer, but this art of knowing how to travel to places like that, not that simple. So indeed, by us, most of davening is usually lip service, or maybe a little pirush hamilas, but definitely not on this level of a journey. So when you hear about Chassidim davening hours, it's not just that they were high Chassidim, they knew how to travel. They knew how to, beruchnis, travel to greater places. So perhaps, the Alter Rebbe said he's going to Mezrich. He wasn't just talking about davening. He wanted to learn how to travel. He wanted to learn how to get the scheda. Okay, so how does that apply to to our lives today? A few years ago, the Frierdiker Rebbe Sichos are filled with mamish treasures. Every time you read it, there's more and more. It's almost like endless. So I saw a Sikha, second day of Pesach Tovshin Daled. It's connected to Yutas Kislev. The big Sikha begins, Frierdiker Rebbe says, that the Tzemach Tzedek was born with a chush hanegina and a chush hatziyur. He had a talent, he had a musical talent and an artistic talent. But he worked hard to destroy these talents because he saw them as distracting him from appreciating Chassidus. So they're good talents, they're God-given talents, but not what he was looking for in Elokus. Then the story continues, Frierdiker Rebbe continues. The year was Tovkuf Nun Zayin, and the first manuscripts of Tanya were beginning to be distributed. So Chassidim were learning Tanya. And then Tovkuf Nun Ches was published. Tovkuf Nun Tes, of course, was the year of Yutas Kislev. So he says there that in Tovkuf Nun Ches, the Chassidim came to the Alter Rebbe, and they said they don't understand Tanya. They don't understand Tanya. And this is what the Alter Rebbe responded. Halbe Zach nennt man nicht. You can't take a half a thing. What's the second half? The Alter Rebbe said Negina, song, melody, Negina. When the Tzemach Tzedek heard that, he had charata that he tried to destroy his chusha Negina. You can imagine Tzemach Tzedek, even after trying, he probably didn't really get rid of Negina. But that's a derech agav. So what does this mean? I remember when I read it, I was like, Ares from the Kela. I never heard this before in my life. We learned Tanya, Mashpim. Never saw the Sikh. I never heard it. I have to tell you, once I saw it, I probably asked 50 Mashpim from one corner of the world to the other. They know the Sikh. I don't think one person told me they knew. And even if they did, they definitely didn't take it seriously. So I said to myself, Halbazach, the Alter Rebbe didn't say, you need Negina to appreciate a piece of Tanya. He said, Halbazach. So it's not a surprise when many of us have challenges of really understanding Tanya properly. If the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim didn't, and the Alter Rebbe told them they need Negina, how much more we do? And what is Negina then? Does it mean saying Tanya with a sing-song? You sing winter? Like your Marvi Sedra? Obviously not. It means Negina means Chusha Negina means the Hergish Shebezeh. You can learn Tanya. It's a very academic study. It's deep. Every word you can spend hours and hours, if not years. But Negina is that Hergish. It resonates. As much as you talk, when you sing a song, it transforms you. It's a whole different experience. They say, the Alter Rebbe said, and when you're asked a question, you tell a story. And you ask the question, I'm sorry, you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. Famous story with Alter Rebbe in Shklov. He went to Shklov and he gave a whole drasha, a Meidike drasha with all the geinas, and he felt as in Ishdos, the people were not really getting it. And that's when the Alter Rebbe said, the famous nigun, that the Rebbe repeated, Purim Tavshin Chai. Tamru ki teva vaye, versuchten zet as the Eibishter is good. And the Rebbe told the story. It says that the Alter Rebbe walked out of the shul in Shklov, and he had hundreds of people flocking after him. The nigun. Because the nigun is kulmas halev, it touches a part of the soul that words can't always capture. I can tell you, as someone that's involved in speaking a bit, the goal of really speaking is that your words should be heard by the listeners as if you're singing a song. Then you know you're successful. Just to give you an example how far Chassidus can reach. A number of years ago, I was invited, Rabbi Binyamin of Tzivus Hashem. It was between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I remember. So the museum here, the Jewish Children's Museum, in order to, I guess, qualify for grants and government funding and so on, they need to have cultural exchanges. So they have to have from people from different religions and different communities. So a group of 30 Sri Lankan monks. You know what that is? Sri Lanka is a country right off of India. It used to once be called Ceylon or Ceylon. So they're monks, they're Buddhist monks. They're coming for a visit to the museum. So I guess, who do you choose? A weirdo like me to speak to them, right? So he's asking me, can you come and say a few words with these monks? I said, I don't speak Sri Lankan. He says, no, they know English. Okay, fine. Good, I come. There you have 30 guys in these orange robes to the floor. You know, they all, and we sat there in where they have that viewing room, where they have, what do they call it, the studio, not studio, like the auditorium, like a filming room there. And they're sitting there in the front, Rabbi Binyamin and a part of the rabbis are in the back. And I felt that since it's Rosh Hashanah time, you know, I have to say, I did read one or two Buddhist articles in my life. So maybe for this purpose, it says the Sanhedrin has to know the Avodah Zarah. So I decided, you know what, the beautiful topic to speak about to them is Hisavas B'chol Rega. The idea of perpetual creation. It's Rosh Hashanah. The world is being renewed. The idea of Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe, with Chidushim of the Shayuchid V'Amunah, Le'elam Hashem Dvar Chivnitza B'Shamayim, that the existence is constantly being renewed, like pulsating energy, like a pulse, like a heartbeat. God is constantly renewing it. You know, a topic I felt they would appreciate. And I elaborated on it. I have to tell you, as I'm speaking, these monks, they're trained to be completely no reaction on their face. Absolutely no reaction. They don't laugh at jokes. They don't cry at any sad stories. They don't smile. There's no reaction. It's mamish el-havdul, the opposite of a Jewish audience. A Jewish audience, you know everything that they're thinking. Like they say, I heard that joke already. You know what? They're already disagreeing with you even before you start saying a sentence. That's a Jewish audience. They're alive, and they make it very clear that they are interacting with you. If not worse, you know, heckling or... Here, they're sitting mamish like stones. I'm telling you. Which was very disconcerting because, you know, when you speak, you want to get a reaction. You want to know, am I getting through? Am I not getting through? Maybe they don't understand the word that I'm saying, or maybe they, you know. Anyway, no reaction. And I tried different things. I tried some of my best jokes, Gordonish. The rabbis in the back were laughing. One of them said, I heard that joke already. I could tell that, you know. Anyway, this was not my ego at work, but I did feel I need to see some response, right? So what do? So I dug into my bag of tricks, and I said, you know what? I'm going to sing a nigun. So I asked him permission. Since Yom Kippur is coming, I said, I'm going to sing a song for you probably never heard. Probably no one ever in Sri Lanka ever heard. So I felt it was like I'm pioneering a new path, bringing a Chassidish nigun to Sri Lankan monks. And I started singing Yala. I sang the whole song through. And here, I must tell you, their faces melted. They did react. So afterwards, it was interesting what happened afterwards. They wanted to sing a song as well. So I let the Anhol of Tzibur Hashem figure out what to do with that, you know. I did my job, I'm out of here, you know. So I asked the monks afterwards, this monk, I said, tell me, did you, what was your reaction to what I said? They said, we love what you said, it was excellent. I said, but you didn't react at all. They said, that's how we're trained. We're trained when the master speaks, you remain silent, no movement at all. You have to be, like what Chassidus says you're supposed to do when you're a makabel. They actually live up to it, you know. I said, what happened by the song? They said, we couldn't control ourselves. So I saw the Alter Rebbe's word come alive. Mazinta Nigen, you do something. Eina Chanami, this is not the Talmid Chacham of Shklov, very different audience, but a nigun is a nigun. So when the Alter Rebbe said that half of the story, Tanya, the under halb is nigina, you begin to understand nigina. As we know, it says in the Sichos that a person has a chush in Chassidus is going to have a chush in nigina. Chush, not always a kishin. There's some people have a chush in nigina, they can't sing. I know people who sing off tune, but they have a chush. Because Nagina is not just a song. Nagina is, like the Alter Rebbe says, the language of the soul. In the Maimon, famous Maimon in Tere'er, Chol Bali Hashir, Nechnosim B'Shir, V'Yetzim B'Shir, Alter Rebbe says an unbelievable word. He says, what's Nechnosim V'Yetzim? So the pshat in the Mishnah is one thing, completely different pshat. How does a neshama travel? We know a body travels. We have legs, Baruch Hashem. You need to travel faster or longer distances. We have vehicles, unicycles, bicycles, tricycles, and so on. We have motorcycles, we have cars, we have buses, we have trains, helicopters, planes. I'm not going to go through everything. Rocket ships. But how does a soul travel? A neshama doesn't travel with physical vehicle. Says the Alter Rebbe, with a nigun. A neshama cannot move one drop without a nigun. And that's why it says the Tesvov Shir HaMailas in Tehillim. What's Shir HaMailas? What's Mailas? The song of the steps. The 15 steps. You can't go up a step in Beis HaMikdash without a nigun. Because real aliyah is not just walking, it's an aliyah beruchnius. That means song lifts you up to a place, transports you to another place. So there are people who have billions of miles of frequent flyer miles, but their soul hasn't moved an inch. And there are people who could be sitting under a talus 6 hours and not budge a physical inch, but they could be moving millions of miles, beruchnis. What the Alter Rebbe was saying is that when you learn Tanya, Chassidus in general, it's supposed to be a journey of your soul. Your neshama is supposed to be hazoza. You're here now, and now you've moved. If you just learn it with seichel, your mind may move, but your heart is not necessarily going to move. Now, of course, I know the big question is then, how do you learn Tanya like that? But at least we know there's an expectation of that. And the Alter Rebbe himself, he could not, so to speak, the Chachmei Shklov, how did he capture them with a nigun at the end of the day? Now, obviously, it means learning and the nigun. It doesn't just mean the nigun. But it's, so really the mastering the art of davening, one of the names for tefillah is shira. Nigina, tefillah has many names. That's why tefillah is connected to song. Tehillim is Ne'im Zmiris Yisrael. A lot of tefillah is the song of Tehillim. So maybe that makes it a little easier if we can master the art of the song and then apply that to davening. Then you could do the journey that the Maggid said, that to get the scheda you need to travel, and then you need to have that nigina. So really, in simple, let's call it 21st century lingo, it means it's not enough to have intellectual intelligence. We need to have emotional intelligence. They call it emotional IQ. You know, again, we're not going to do a survey here, but there's a lot of people very smart, play good mind games. Their brains are very powerful, high IQs, but emotional intelligence sometimes like a 2-year-old. Chassidus teaches us not just to be smart people, but to take the midas and mature midas. Mature Midas includes the basis of all Avos Yisrael, being able to be Sevel another person. So Chassidus says, that's Das. Molad is Deis Hashem. What's the connection to Lo Yerei V'Lo Yashchisu? What does Deya have to do with no destruction? Like Yeshaya says, because Deya means you're Makabel and able to be Sevel, two different opinions. You know how to have a conversation even with someone you disagree with respect. The basis of Avos Yisrael is Meichen de Gadlus, not like two children that are fighting over petty little things. And Chassidus came to refine us as people. And the Even HaBeichen is, yes, can you sit and be not just at peace with another, but really harmony. Avos Chassidim, talk so much about Avos Chassidim. So then people ask the question, I mean, you know, I'll bring it up, even though a lot of people don't like these type of questions because it's taboo. Why do you then see so many Chassidim fighting? Okay, so the classic answer is that wherever we're strong in, that's where we are always weakened, you know, that type of thing. That's our Nisayon. But the whole point of Chassidus, Perek Lamed Beis of Tanya, was Agboras Hatzur Alachem and Afshei Iker Gufei Tofel. That's the Even HaBeichen. The Even HaBeichen is, can you reach a level that the Moichin affects your Midas? We all know you can be a smart person, but it also affects how you behave Ben Adam L'Chaveirei. And that's part of what Chassidus is all about. So when you learn Tanya, and we're bringing now in Yutas Kislev about Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, it comes down to this an Even HaBeichen. The Even HaBeichen is how we behave in our behavior with each other. In an area where yesterday we may have had a Chalukei Deis, or even worse than that, you know, you let Chassidus affect you, that, now you know what? It could be Maver al Midesov, you could look at the bigger picture and allow of Lukolona to unite us, even though we may be diverse. I mean, that's just one example. At the end of Perikut Beis, the Alter Rebbe brings the story of Yosef, this week's Parshas. Yosef was Ma'aver al Midesav, that even though his brothers, what they did to him, he would have been justified to be upset. And yet, no, the Eibishter sent me, and he brings from Zohar there how kind of reward and schar he received for that ability to overlook his own personal pain and agmas nefesh for the good of the entire people. So the dugmoyes go on and on. So the second half of Perikut Beis is all about Ben Adam L'Chaveirei. First half is Ben Adam L'Mokim. So when you learn Tanya in that way, Adaita de Nafshe, like you sing a song, it changes the whole thing. And song touches you. Without the song, you can learn it. Maybe it'll touch you, maybe it won't. So with Alter Rebbe, that was Negeya. So maybe going forward, we will institute it in our yeshivas and we will learn that sikha from Pesach Tovshin Daled. It's not my words, it's that Friedrich Rebbe, that a halbe Maisa, a halbe Zach. There's Tanya, there's the Negina. And Negina means, Hergish means, as I said, how we behave in our Zichuch and Birur Amidus. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim. I'd like to share with you a story that a personal story happened with me a number of years ago. Which was one of my my proudest moments of appreciating a chassidus, appreciating what the Rabbeim, the Alter Rebbe, and all the Rabbeim were Moshe Nefesh for. As I said earlier, many times we take for granted certain things. You know, we grew up in this culture, in this environment. But then there are moments, maybe more than moments. So this was in Huntington, New York. It's in Long Island. So Touro College has a law school there, Touro Law School. And in the auditorium there, they had a pretty large event. A good 500 people probably. And like a lot of things, you plan one way, then it doesn't always work out as you planned it. So I was invited to come speak about Mashiach. But whatever, I'm getting into all the details, there was some mess up. And suddenly I find out I'm on a panel with two others. Now, it doesn't personally bother me to be on a panel. But here, I know panels, I have my experience that you can be very confusing, especially when you're talking about a controversial or sensitive topic. And who was on the panel with me? Without names, but their titles were, one was an Orthodox rabbi and one was a conservative rabbi. And you'll see from the story why I don't call myself a rabbi and definitely not an Orthodox rabbi.
Did you leave?
No, I didn't leave. I went. I suggested, which really made it work out well. See, my concern was when you're in a panel, and what do? If the other panelist says something you disagree with, it can come across like you started bickering with them. It's not comfortable, and the audience gets confused. On the other hand, if you don't disagree, when you do, people get the impression you agree. That's one of the problems in these scenarios, especially about Mashiach. You can imagine. So I suggested to the host, I said, you know what, just keep it more mesudim, organized. Why don't we prepare 10 questions beforehand, show it to all the panelists. That way, everyone will respond. It won't just be a free-for-all. There'll be some structure to it. It actually turned out very well because the questions, we all approved them. They were solved. Like, for example, why is Mashiach a fundamental principle in Jewish faith? It didn't say, is it a principle of Jewish faith? Because then you can start getting into debates. It was a fact. Why? And all, it was a very respectable and well done. Nothing was said that I would say was so fundamentally problematic. Worked out all right. But here's where the main thing happened next. At the end, they opened up for the audience for questions. So I remember within back of the auditorium, all the way to the left, a young woman stood up, and she asked the following question. She says, the question's to all three of you. I speak, she said, on behalf of the largest segment of the Jewish population today. It's called the unaffiliated Jew. That's not affiliated with any particular denomination. We know we're Jewish, but we not necessarily go to synagogue. Don't identify maybe with anti-Semitism or Israel. So my question is like this. Millions of us who question the very principles that you all talked about, that you say are fundamental to Jewish faith, what will happen to all of us secular Jews, who some of us are skeptics, some of us are doubters, some of us are agnostics, some are atheists? What will happen to us if Mashiach you're talking about comes tonight? What will happen to us tomorrow morning? Now, I remember thinking, I've been around, I heard a lot of questions in my life. And, you hear almost every question. After a while, you start, and this one I never heard before. And thank God, I was third in the row to speak. So I was last. And I was saying, let's see what's going to happen. This is going to be very interesting now. I've told the story a number of times, and I always ask people, I say, what would you answer? What would be your answer? Remember, we're talking about the assimilated Jews. Tanei Shanishbu, call them whatever you like. What will happen? Mashiach comes tonight. Now we know, listen what happened here. The Orthodox rabbi came first. And he said the following 4 words. He said, God will have mercy. That's what he said. Now, I don't know if you ever heard 500 people boo somebody, but it's very, very interesting. A boo, when a lot of people boo together, it resonates like music. Boo, I guess. And this is not 10 people, 500 people. So the whole place, they booed him. Obviously, first of all, he didn't answer the question. Second of all, he was God will have mercy. In other words, and he didn't say it as much, but everyone understood what he meant, that maybe God will kill you painlessly instead of painfully. I don't know, whatever. Again, he didn't say it, but that was the impression. And he was, of course, very embarrassed. Okay, it's not over. The next is the conservative rabbi. And we were sitting on a podium, and the lights were shining, I remember, and he turns to me. He says, Rabbi Jacobson, I have exactly that same question myself as well. What will happen to them? That's what he said. Okay. But then he added fuel to the fire, and he said, and his voice was dripping with cynicism. So it was really, and you're talking about a large crowd of people, it's like you can't undo what you say. And he said the following. I don't want to mention the name. He said, there was a tzaddik from the previous generation that said, as I said, cynically he's saying, that said that the Holocaust happened because Jews were sinners. They sinned. Now, it didn't stop there. He started going into graphic detail how every atrocity perpetrated by the Nazis on the Jews was midah keneged midah, tit for tat, for the Jews not doing this and not doing that. Spoke about the children, about Tarsh Mishpacha, about Shetels, I mean, you name it. How all this was the Nazis' persecution and torture of the Jews was a result of their basically being Bala Vedas. You can imagine the place. I mean, I've been around, there have been many talks. It was everyone was mortified. It was like everyone, you could feel the tension in the air. And he says, so is that going to happen if Mashiach comes tonight? Another Holocaust like that? For all the Jews that are not observant? This is all directing it to me, So I was really in such a position, to be honest, like literally on the spot. 2 rabbis who did not answer the question, they made it a lot worse, frankly, which that alone was embarrassing. You're supposed to be a rabbi, you can't even answer a question like that. And I honestly did not have a clue what I'm going to say, even though I had a little time to prepare. So, in times like this, what you do is, at least what I do, you close your eyes, you pray to Hashem that He should put the right words in you. You think about what the Rebbe would say, what the Baal Shem Tov would say, what the Yitzchak Baditchever would say, what Moshe Rabbeinu Ohev Yisrael would say. And I opened my mouth and I said, and I also knew the stakes were high, because if I give an answer like they did, or no answer, 500 Jews are going to go away forever, perhaps never giving this question another chance. Not just that woman that asked it. The place was silent, like, as I told you, I never had so much attention. So I said the following, and in these times I know you invoke Schus Avos. I said, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Chassidus, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, once said that when you're asked a question, what I said before, and you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So I'm going to tell a story, and if that doesn't work, I'll have to sing. So I got a good laugh from the audience. It would have been nice to have said good night and everybody leaves, but obviously I couldn't get off the hook that easily. So I told a story, famous story of the Rebbe Rashab, and here again, Rebbe Rab Shalom Doiber, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Tofresh Mem Ches, Simchas Torah. He said, a Maimer Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba B'Truni in B'Riesov. And he spoke about the mile of Anoshim Pshutim, of simple Jews. And he spoke in Lahafli, the mile of a simple Jew, who doesn't have scholarship, and doesn't have necessarily piety, and mitzvahs, and so on. But it's a ish pashut. The famous story following Simchas Torah, that the Chassid Rab Moshe, Men's son, went into the Rebbe Rashab and said to him, Rebbe, you always encourage asking questions. Ad kidei kach. We understand the mile of a ish poshet, but the way the Rebbe spoke about it, ish poshet, it's like almost completely being mevatel, Talmidei Chachamim, Bali Aveda, etc., etc. So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, you deal in stones, right? You're in business, so he was a diamond merchant. So please bring me several stones and put them on the table. Different values. Okay, the Rebbe said, he didn't know why. Oh, fine. He brought several diamonds. And the Rebbe Rashab said, I'm going to choose the most expensive one. And he chose the most lustrous stone, the one that was largest and shining most. No, so he didn't want to contradict the Rebbe, so he didn't avoid answering. The Rebbe says, is it the most? He says, no. But it looks so beautiful. Says, Rebbe, with all due respect, you have to have a trained eye. I don't know if he said the 4 C's, carrot, color, cut, etc. But he definitely said you need to have a... So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, if that's the case with an inanimate daimon, a stone, how much more so with neshamas? You have to have a trained eye. What do you know, what you see? What kind of expert are you on neshamas? That's what he said. So I told the story. So I said, here we are, 500 souls in this room. There are millions of others all over the world. What do we know about souls? We don't know anything about a soul. Can anyone say who's the greatest soul in this room right now? Mi Yedea, I quoted from Tanya. Mi Yedea Gedulasna, my lesson. Who knows who's a great soul? It's not based on any physical, external expression. Like, for example, why did one neshama the Eibishter choose and put into a beautiful family that gave that child all the opportunities, a great chinuch and Torah, privilege, financially comfortable, healthy family, and another neshama the Eibishter put into Rahman al-Itzlan, a dysfunctional family, a broken family. They didn't give the child any Jewish education. Who decided that? The shamas didn't decide which way to go. The Eibishter decided this neshama here, this neshama here. Not our schus. It's God's gift. And then I concluded and I said, and the same Alter Rebbe said another thing once. In the fight Maimer Tovkuf Samach Beis, Moshe Hayanov Kol Adam Asher Pnei Adama. Why was Moshe so humble for all people? So the Alter Rebbe says, he was shown all the generations, Ad Hayama Achren, Ad Hayema Achren, all the souls till the end of time. And who was he humble for? The neshamas of Ikvis and the Mashiach, the last generation. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe's generation, they were an enlightened generation. They were given all the gifts, and they also were far from perfect. But here's a generation, it's the Seinulay Inu, no miracles, a generation that would go through all the Nisenus of Galus, and still a Jew is trying. I mean, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say, but I just wanted to make the point, trying to go to Shul Yom Kippur, exploring even or asking what does it mean to be Jewish? When Moshe saw that thousands of years later, without any miracles, and the punkt verkehrt, achesher kafel mechupel, and all the hell laws, and there's still the nitzutz, there's still something. That's what he was humble for. And I elaborate exactly as I said it now. I did not, the other two messed it up, so I decided I'm going to take my full time here. And I said, so I was taught by my Rebbe, and I was taught by my Rabbeim. And I said clearly, Chassidus Chabad, I said it, I wanted to say it, Beferish B'Shem Emre. I was taught that if Mashiach comes tonight, the neshamas with the greatest challenges are going to march first. Because the fact that they are in such a situation is maybe because they were given the greatest strengths. And it's God's mysterious ways, we don't know. And by tomorrow morning, every Jew, no matter what background, will recognize that the best way to actualize as a human being and as a Jew is through Torah mitzvahs. That's what I said. And I sat down. I have to tell you the reaction, even though it was good for my ego, but, total transparency. In contrast to what they gave that rabbi, the boo, was a big standing ovation. And I was very proud that moment, not in any cheap way, because I knew my answer was not from my ideas. This is Chassidus. Without Chassidus, you never could answer that question, because everything's based on how many Torah mitzvahs you have. The concept of what a neshama is, the mystery of a neshama, and we don't know which neshama is greater. A Mashiach coming is not like the Yom Adin HaGodol and everybody who's secular is going to just be killed, which is the classic view by many mainstream thinking. Is pure Chassidus. Chassidus teaches you what a neshama is and humbles you that anyone here, and I say this all the time, by a Shabbos table, if someone were to ask you, right now, someone were to ask you, who's the greatest neshama on this table, there's no one here is going to say the one that knows the most Torah, or I'm the host. How do you know? And I can tell you, take away Chassidus and someone will ask who's the greatest neshama. It's going to be the biggest Talmud Chacham, or the guy with the longest beard, or the guy at least who's masquerading as the biggest Mahadir, or whatever it may be. So the point is, let me just tell you the end of it. The woman came over to me, the one that asked the question. She was very emotional, and she said to me these words. She says, "You don't know what you did for me tonight." That was it. I was wise enough not to ask what that means. Not my business. I don't know what she was going through. I never met her again. That was once back then. But sometimes you need to have a story like this to capture the real gift and the real bracha what Chassidus gives us. Again, it's easy to take for granted. Many of us, this is a given. Of course, who knows which neshama is greater? Like the Alter Rebbe says that klor, mi yedeya, in Tanya, Perek Lev. But to see it in action, and in this type of way, as I said, this story captured very profoundly. So I think Megillah Lepel, some of the greatest gifts, as I mentioned, we take for granted. We don't appreciate. Comes Yutas Kislev, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, and we're standing. It's 223 years since Alter Rebbe left prison, and after everything we went through, we're here. It's critical to not squander and to appreciate the moment. We know the Alter Rebbe says anyone that'll celebrate his day, all the gates are open, all the brachas are open. It's not stam words. Why would the Alter Rebbe say that? It's because this day represents more than just an individual liberation of an individual miracle. It changed history. The door opened up that Chassidus can now come and pour forth without hagbalas to every person, even secular people, even people who may not, like I said before, the Ben Chela may not know anything, but the neshama could be touched with Chassidus. Now, obviously, we want to teach Kol HaTorah Kula to everyone, but sometimes the first thing you need is to awaken someone. You need to touch, and it's the neshama things that touch people. It's not always the digdur kal shel divrei sofrim that's going to touch the person. It may, but neshama things definitely touch. And that's what Chassidus is. It's a neshama language. It's a language of the soul. It's the song of the soul, as we spoke about. That's why Chassidus, it's not just, Nigin is not just a adjunct, it's a chelik ikri, and then both the singing the Nigunim and also the whole Hargosha of it. The Rebbe promised us 30 years ago, he said that he did everything, and now it's up to us. Now, what does it mean, up to us? Everyone's been debating that question for 30 years, and they're still debating it. So everybody can type how they want, and I'm sure there's many interpretations. But one thing is for sure, there's something up to us that you can't deny. That's what the Rebbe said. That means there's something you and I can do and should do, and the Rebbe said we could do, because he wouldn't tell us we can do it if we don't have the koyach, that we haven't done till now. To me, it's very straightforward. I always thought of it this way. Ultimately, Chassidus was given to us to appreciate Elikus and to be Megala Elikus. Geula is putting the Aleph of Alufa Shalelim into Geula and seeing Gili Elikus. What does the Alter Rebbe say in Perek Lamed Zayin, right in the beginning? That this Gili of Yemesa Mashiach Tchisa Mesa, what is it? Gili Erein Sov Be'elam Hazeh Gashmi. In language of Nigla, of the Rambam, Lo Yi'esa Kol Elam El L'Dasas Hashem Bolvad. Mola Oretz Deis Hashem. Kamayim Liyom Mechasim. What is this Deis Hashem? This is Chassidus. The pure Chassidus is the closest thing we have to Das Hashem. Now, come over, Kol HaTeira, but especially Primis HaTeira, that has that Neshamadika language. So to me, it's as clear as day that Yutas Kislev, Rosh Hashanah Chassidus, that's what we need to do. We have to be able to personalize Chassidus in our own lives and communicate that to someone, even one person. This woman, I don't know what happened to her, but I hope that the word that I shared in some way affected her, maybe till this day. You never know. Sometimes you see the teitzos and the paytas, the fruits of your labor. Sometimes you don't. But there's no question that, as the Rabbein promised us, that you share a divrei elikim chayim emes. Emes has an effect. Sometimes immediate. Sometimes it's planting a seed. Emes me'eretz titzmach. So the commitment that we have to have, each one of us has to, as the Rebbe Rashab says, have to create a sviva. In a Yem he brings it. And a Bechosid does not create a sviva, an environment. He has to ask himself, why did his neshama come down to this world? It's a pretty sharp expression. So here we are. Our neshama is here. The Eibishter renewed it this morning. Shechzata b'nishmasi, teherehi, neshama shenasata b'teherehi. Why did it come down? To celebrate Yutas Kislev, to celebrate Chassidus, but above all, to bring Chassidus to even one person, even to ourselves. Chutzah, that Tzemach Tzedek says, is even bringing from Meichen to Midas. But Chutzah today means a lot more than that. Chutzah is also Chutzah Shei Chutzah Lamatim, Chutzah Mimeno, which means to the farthest people who don't even know Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit. But that even the tipa, one drop of water from the Keser Melech, can revive even a comatose child. And we all are in some way comatose. So l'chaim, to Yutas Kislev, to the Alter Rebbe, to the Rabbeim, the gifts they've given us, and we have our role now to appreciate them. The Rebbe said, I gave you everything, tut was ihr kennt, tut alles was ihr kennt, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. And one of the stories that were told before Yutes Kislev is the famous story with Rab Shmuel Munkes. Today we have more details because the Rebbe's Shimas that were discovered after Gimel Tammuz. But I think the story carries a tremendous lesson to us. You know, the big questions people ask today, it's 28 years since Gimel Tammuz, 30 years since Chav Zayin Oder, Nun Beis. So the story goes, and here with all the details, is that when the Alter Rebbe began hearing the rumors that they were mastering on him, informing on him for so-called counter-revolutionary activity in supporting Turkey and countries that were at war with Russia. So the Alter Rebbe, knowing that he may be arrested, prepared in his house a back door where he could hide in case anybody came to arrest him. He could escape. So indeed, some of the soldiers came of the regime, and they and as soon as they heard the knock on the window, so the Alter Rebbe escaped in the secret hiding place. The Rebbetzin, his Rebbetzin, remained there, and the soldiers started interrogating her and roughing her up. It says in the Shema that they actually slapped her and they knocked out a tooth. That's what it says. Then they left. The Alter Rebbe came out of the hiding place. It's middle of the night, and there's another knock on the window. As I said, some of these details we didn't know till the Rishimus of the Rebbe were. And who is it? They peek out the window. It's none other than Shmuel Munkes. Shmuel Munkes. Shmuel Munkes, Vice Days, this is my own order, was a Nachtfegel. He seemed to always come at night. You know, the famous story of Shmuel Munkes, when he first came to the Alter Rebbe, was also middle of the night. And the Alter Rebbe told him that if he doesn't leave, he's going to call the Goy. And he said, Mein Goy is starker Farayer Goy Rebbe. You know. So there's some people that are night birds, Nachtfegelach. Shmuel Munkes came at night. The Alter Rebbe opened the door and says to Shmuel, Du kommst bei Nacht. You also come at night. In other words, you're also frightening us. You know, who comes by night? The umgewunschene Elementen, the Mazikim, come by night. So Rav Shmuel Munkes says to the Alter Rebbe, Ich habe nicht gewusst, dass beim Rebbe mit der Nacht. I didn't know by the Rebbe there's a night. In other words, the Rebbe has something to be afraid of. And then the famous part that everybody knows, he asked Shmuel Munkes, should he cooperate and allow himself to get arrested? So here's, but I'll share with you a line that many people don't know that was not printed because it was so sharp. So Shmuel Munkes famously answered, he said to the Alter Rebbe, Memonevshach, either or. Ebe bist der Rebbe, they're going to shot, and if you're a Rebbe, nothing's going to happen. The Ebe still protect you. Und Ebe nicht, and here's ... But since you all came out late in the night, I'll reveal to you what it says. It's a little secret. Sekum der Akel Kop, you deserve a bullet to your head, as Shmuel Munkes said to the Alter Rebbe. Fatzunemen, the Geschmack von Elam Hazer, von Azefel Chsidim. So taking away the pleasure of Elam Hazer from so many Chsidim. Now, it's another Farbrengen. How could a Chossid say that to a Rebbe? Even as a joke. Now, obviously, Shmuel Munkes didn't even have a Havamina that second half is true. Maybe that's why he could say it, but by him, the Rebbe is a Rebbe, Shtavas Serein. But he said that to the Alter Rebbe, imagine. That's how it's printed. Now, I'll tell you why I share this story, both on a personal note, but also I think it's a tremendous lesson. I always thought, like, why do we need to know this story exactly? What's connected to Yutas Kislev? Because then Alter Rebbe did get arrested. He did cooperate, and Take, a Rebbe, and St. Ishgeshat. He came out not only intact, he came out stronger even. It was the opening of Chassidus, in ways that unprecedented. So today, since I guess we call it, bei uns ist alles offen, yeah, Meret alles. There was a time everything was a secret. Now everybody's saying everything. Everything is an open mic. Once people didn't say anything, today they don't stop speaking. That joke they say, this Jew went to the Galach and he came to confess his sins. And the Galach was like so impressed. He says to him, before you do that, how did you come to realize that this is the place of truth? You're coming to me, the Galach. He said, don't take it personal. I'm telling everybody, In Tov Lamed Ches, a Chatosi ani maskir. No, I'm not going to share everything. I'll share one confession, just in case you're getting excited. Yeah. Hintele, dir ken, mir kannst du kuschen, yeah. Yeah. So the Lamed Ches, I was 21 years old. I was in my prime as a bocher, 770, working in Sefer Lekutim Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe's creation, his own initiative. I was helping in the Sichas. And it was like I was like in Gan Eden. It couldn't be better. Mamish, all the Giluyim, Lamed Ches, Tishrei. And then came Shmini Atzeres Lamed Ches, the heart attack. And it's unless you were around then, it's hard to describe. But if there's a time, unlike today, unfortunately, that nobody even uttered, even a remez of a word about the Rebbe in any mortal way. Today, Retman Gerobe Zachen, then you wouldn't even, So I remember, I myself, I was, I had my so-called skepticism, if you wish. And I remember saying to myself, and I couldn't say it to anybody, forget it, you'd be excommunicated. I said, what happens if the Eibishter takes the Rebbe? And it was a serious heart attack. We're not talking about a joke. And now today we know it was a killer heart attack, especially 5 a.m. And I said to myself, we're all giving our entire lives to the Rebbe. And let's say this, what happens tomorrow if the Rebbe is no longer here? Begashmias. Like, we all left hanging. And as I said, there was no one to talk to. You couldn't even say that. You're not even allowed to think it. But I did. And Hashgacha Pratis, I don't know how, why, I happened to fall upon the story of Shmuel Munkes. It didn't have all the details that I shared now because we didn't have all, but the story was known. And I'll tell you the dramatic impact it had on me. I'll tell you exactly my thoughts then. What I realized was, after reading that story, I said, you know what, grow up and stop being a little baby. You're 21 years old. You're only here when there's the party, when everything is so beautiful. And as soon as the going gets a little tough, you're out. If you're in the army, sometimes it's going to be beautiful, and sometimes there are going to be challenges. That's what happens when you're at war. If the Rebbe is emes, like Rav Shmuel Munkes said, that the Rebbe is an emes lamite, then he's emes whether it works out the way you like it or you don't like it. And if he's not, get out right now, even when things are going good. In other words, you're only here when everything is nice. It's mamish what I said to myself. And I grew up very quickly that tkufa. And if you want, I could say I had my Gimel Tammuz moment there. Because I made my decision. And it was, I'm in. If it works out the way I like it, Ateva Manoim, doesn't work out exactly. The Rebbe is nitzchi because it looks good to me and because it's nice. And if there's a heart attack, suddenly the nitzchi is not there. Monavshach, a Rebbe is a Rebbe. Like Shmuel Munkes said. And if he's not, that was my very extreme black and white picture. It wasn't like half-half. You're either in or you're not in. A soldier in an army, if you're a real soldier, not every battle will be always won right away. That's life. That's how it is. If the Jews always were winning and had no tzaras through Golus, that's not the case. We had plenty of tzaras. We had plenty of reasons to give up on God and on Torah and mitzvahs. But we didn't, because that's what a mature person does. You have enough reason to fight on. Anyway, this was my experience. I'm speaking completely for myself. I'm not saying this. But then I heard a few stories that I want to share. I think, so when Gimel Tammuz came, for me personally, of course it was a tragedy like for all of us. But on a personal level, I want the Rebbe, you love the Rebbe, and Begashmis, you want to be with the Rebbe. But it was not an existential crisis for me like in Amunah. Because to me, a Nitzchi is a Nitzchi. Nitzchi does not depend on, like when I was asked once by a journalist, so why don't you look for another Rebbe? I said, listen, why don't you ask me why don't I look for another father? My father passed away 16 years ago. I'm not looking for another father. I have a father. Wherever he is now, but it's still my father. So I heard two stories when I was a bocher that came to very relevant these days, which really captures this even more. The first story is from both with the Tzemach Tzedek. When the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke was nostalgic, also Chaim Mushke and the same name, and also 5 years earlier, Tafresh Chaf Aleph, Tzemach Tzedek, his Talkus is Tafresh Chavav. So we know that Tzemach Tzedek went into a, whatever you want to call it, a Helam. He didn't say Mamorim anymore, there was no Yechidus, there were no answers. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but it was definitely, we know it from letters. Chassidim tried, they taught the Tzemach Tzedek that we need to have. Tzemach Tzedek, Vos Kanechton, Ein Melech B'lei Matranisa. A king is not a king without a queen, which of course is very strong words. It's similar, very similar to what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe asked Rabbi Pekarsky after Chav Bei Shvat if Al Pi Halacha he still has a kesher with the shver. I mean, just the shaila is already shocking. Rabbi Pekarsky was smart enough to say, what's the shaila? Stuff is Sereid and it's Nitzchi again. But the Rebbe asked. So, Ein Melech B'lei Matranisa, and the Chassidim answered, the Torah is called the Malka. Yeah, but the Tzemach Tzedek was not consoled. So it was a dark time because Chassidim, the Tzemach Tzedek wasn't secluded. Then the word came that Tzemach Tzedek is going to say a Maimer Chassidus. So you can imagine the Simcha Gedela. Tzemach Tzedek is going to say a Maimer Chassidus after all this. Chassidim gathered the Lubavitch. Rabbi Hillel Paracher was already older man. He passed away in Tofresh Chof Daled, Yud Aleph Ov. So also he was already older man by then, but still a mimer for him. The Rebbe Gezang a mimer came to Lubavitch. It was hard. He came. They're all waiting for Tzemach Tzedek to come say the Maimer Chassidus. Listen to this. When I heard it from Rab Shmuel, I think Rab Shmuel Levitin. His stories were very close to the Makar because he was born after the Marash, Stalkos. So, okay. Tzemach Tzedek, they're waiting, half hour passes, 45 minutes. Tzemach Tzedek's not coming out. So Rabbi Hillel couldn't wait not because he was very physically not well, so he was walking out he would come back, but he was walking out. And then he suddenly heard these two younger, whatever you want to call them, younger Chassidim, they're talking to each other, and he didn't like what he heard. They were talking somewhat in a language you're not supposed to talk about a Rebbe. Like they were saying, was Kementon, the Rebbe is, I don't know whether they said Moresh Cheda or some other expression like that. So you can imagine Rabbi Hillel heard that, he got a new surge of chayas, and he went over to them. This is exactly how I heard the story. And he told them, Shvenzelach, Shvenzelach, Shvenzelach. You can all interpret it as you see fit. There's mild interpretations. You can use more explicit interpretations. So Shvenzelach, Shvenzelach, Shvenzelach. Was meint ihr? A Rebbe is eigen an Noz mit Amoil. A Rebbe is elikus. B'shas edai helam af elikus, edai helam af Rebbe. What do you think? A Rebbe is eyes, nose, and a mouth. A Rebbe is godliness. And when there's a concealment on elikus, on godliness, there's a concealment on the Rebbe. You think about, I mean, when you hear it, it's poshut. But it's a whole different way of looking at a Rebbe. In other words, a Rebbe is a dugma l'mayla. There's Shchinta Begalusa also. The Eibishter also cries. Kavyochel. So a Rebbe could also cry, and a Rebbe could also be what we call, it's not sad like we're sad. It's elikus, it's a getliche sadness, so to speak, a getliche helam. Now, this is the way you speak about a Rebbe, if you're going to speak already. The second story I heard was also with Rabbi Hillel and the Tzemach Tzedek. So Rabbi Hillel would go to Yechidus, the Tzemach Tzedek, he would always go last, because he had a lot of Avrechim, he had a lot of people would come to him. So when he'd be by the Rebbe, first he'd bring up his things, and then he would talk about the other Chassidim that would come to Rabbi Hillel. Rabbi Hillel was a big mashpia. Halber Rebbe, they called him. Anyway, the Yechidus finishes, and Rabbi Hillel stayed. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, whenever the time. Tzemach Tzedek said, "What's noch? Like what else you want?" So Rabbi Hillel had a sincere not taiva by him. He wanted to hear a Maimach Chassidus. So he says to the Tzemach Tzedek, "We'll have a Maimach Chassidus." Tzemach Tzedek smiles and says, "Those manim kvuyim, there are designated times for a Maimach, midnacht, like middle of nowhere." But and then Rabbi Hillel remained standing. The Tzemach Tzedek stood up and walked out. He didn't leave, by the minig then was by Yechidus night, the Chassidim that went to Yechidus didn't go to sleep. They farbrenged all night. So they were farbrenging Rabbi Hillel and the Chassidim. And lo and behold, around an hour later, Tzemach Tzedek reappears and says, "Amayim Chassidus," for them. So what did the Chassidim farbreng? I remember Rab Shmuel said that he heard it from Chassidim Hurad, that Farbrengen. He said, what did they farbring? They farbrenged. These were the words he said. He said, "As a Rebbe kenish tamak peidav Chassidim." A Rebbe cannot have any, God forbid, ever cut himself off from Chassidim. But a Chassid can kavyochel feel like paid on the Rebbe, like he feels the Rebbe is not there for him. So the Chassidim said, "Adivas warten for a Rebbe, but the Rebbe tzarikum." That was what they said. Oneb nicht. Then they didn't finish the sentence. So I want to say, we're here, Yites Kislev. It is a while. It's a generation from Gimel Tammuz almost. A lot of people here weren't even born yet then. And we're 223 years from the Alter Rebbe. But we live with the nitzchias of Chassidus, that Yad Chassidim al Yena, despite what we went through. And just the mere fact that we're sitting here, forget about all the madregas, no madregas. This is a personification of nitzchias, of the Rabbeim and what they stood for. And I think it's vital to recalibrate how we talk about it and how we think about the Rebbe. Obviously, we all understand Gimel Tammuz is a Helam. That's Dover Poshet. But is it a stira to the nitzchias of the Rebbe? It can be Me'erish Shvekes and Silas. It's an Asayan, no doubt. But when you hear and learn what a Rebbe really is, these stories, Shmuel Munkus said, and that's why I think maybe that story is so Yutas Kislev. Shmuel Munkus, in a sense, as a chassid, because the Alter Rebbe didn't know that if he's a real Rebbe, he doesn't have to be afraid, but he needed Shmuel Munkus to tell him that you're a Rebbe and the Rebbe still protect you. But when a chassid says it, it means even Das Tachten, even Elam Hazeh recognizes it, that a Rebbe is a nitzchi, and there's nothing to be afraid of. And the other option is not an option, because the other option means if you're really not a Rebbe, then everything you did, you deserve the worst. What kind of behavior is that of teaching chassidus and bittul, and then, how could you deprive us from a geschmack, a piece of roast beef? What is this? What do we have here? Okay. Chopped liver. So, essentially, Yutas Kislev is a testimony that it's nitzchi. When the Alter Rebbe in prison asked the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid when they visited him, what should he do? And they said, Adarabah, when you come out, you should even more spread more chassidus. Because there was a vindication that what the Alter Rebbe was doing was not only allowed, that on the contrary, the Rebbe Rashab says, Schwer sagen, that's what he says. It's hard to say this, but you could say that Peterburg, meaning Yutas Kislev, is al derech zayis eloi moitze shamnei at sheketchenese. He doesn't want to say it on the Alter Rebbe, ketchenese, meaning kvetched. But the Alter Rebbe, when he was pressed, he was squeezed, the olive oil came flowing. I remember just as a derech hatzachas, every time that individual from Bnei Brak would talk against the Jewish people, the Rebbe would talk the Gzeste Giluyim about Avis Yisrael, Mamish Chidushim. I remember Amzu Yitzarti, Vayikra Tovshin Nun, Kisove Nun Aleph, Vayichi Shmois Nun Aleph. Every time he came out with an anti-Semitic drosha from Bnei Brak, the Rebbe would come out with this deepest musogim in what neshama is. And you needed him to bring that out. And I remember we made a joke that we tried to convince them in Bnei Brak to start talking against Samach Vav and Ayin Beis. And then we'll hear from the Rebbe the Gzeste Giluyim of the Chidushim of Chassidus. But we didn't pull that off. We couldn't pull that off. But that's how it is. Me'ez Siba, Menagid, it says in Bos Lagani, Nitzchias, Netzach, Netzachen. You need an oyev, you need an enemy to bring out the Midas HaNetzachen. The Midas HaNetzachen of Yutas Kislev and the unbelievable humility, Katenti Mekol Achsodim, the Alter Rebbe in the Geras HaKedesh Beis, how Katenti, all the Chsodim, I'm humbled by it. And Lei Listrik Aleim, they shouldn't gloat, Chsidim shouldn't gloat, even though we had this in Netzachen, because Netzachen is Shal Kedusha, it's not about beating up someone who don't. And but it's still a testimony of Nitzchias of a Rebbe, Nitzchias of Chassidus, and therefore, what's the personal lesson? That Gimel Tammuz does not change the Nitzchias of the Rebbe or Chassidus, even if there's a Helam. And Adarabah, the Helam ultimately is meant to bring out even a bigger Gilui, because at the end of the day, that's how we have to understand it. That why God wanted it this way, we don't know. But if anything, it should bring out a deeper ava, a deeper love, a deeper passion. And in many ways, Poshet Balabat is Geret. The Rebbe is not here for bringing tonight Yutas Kislev in ways that we, with our Einei Boser and Aznaim Psorim, can hear. So we have to, so to speak, I don't want to say fill the void. We can't replace it. But we have to be the arms and legs. And the Rebbe said clearly, Gimel Shvat Tovshin Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, that when the Rebbe has a stroke, we have to be the mouthpiece. We have to be the mouthpiece, that our mouths say what the Rebbe said on Yutas Kislev. That's our job. And now we have to do it even stronger. Like the Rebbe then gave over when Lamet Ches, when there was no Farbrengen, there was an empty chair, a kofis, before a kofis, Shminchas Teda, Lamet Ches. So the Rebbe said, when the seat is empty, it has to actually remind you even more, and therefore bring out even more. Like the Rebbe said, the vacuum of the needle produces even more power than the needle itself. That was the Kudah. So obviously we all prefer no Gimel Tammuz and all these Helomis. But B'Poel, for a Chassid, there's no other option. The Helam has to evoke a deeper Gilui, and a deeper Rotzen, a deeper Tshuke, and Semoyin. We spoke Tzamalacha Nafshi. Maybe Take, sometimes when you have the Giluim, you don't really appreciate it. And now it causes us to have to appreciate it deeper. So Yutas Kislev today, Tovshin Pei Beis, has particular meaning that the Nitzchis of the Alter Rebbe and all the Rabbeim, we need to hold on to that. That's the only thing we have. There's no other option, to be honest. I mean, Chaz v'Shalom, someone has questions, by all means, ask your questions. And I know many people have very big challenges. But at the end of the day, like Reb Shmuel Munke said, Bista Rebbe, this is it. There's really no two options. It's either totally emes or totally sheker. There's really no half emes here. And I know it sounds very extreme, but I don't really see another option, to be honest. When you're coming to matters like this, as a Rebbe or as a Nishke Rebbe, and obviously we know there's only one option here. So, may Yutas Kislev Tovshin Pei Beis finally demonstrate that Chassidim are ready, and we should be reunited with the Rebbe and enough Rachmanas on us. How much can we really be expected? We're not Bali Madrege, But we have to, as long as we're here, we have to do whatever we can. That's our job. And hopefully the Shari Rachmim will be opened from heaven, as the Alter Rebbe says, on this day, and the rest will be done by the Eibishter, by the Rebbe, L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim. Yeah. 100% correct. l'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. I once heard a story, time of the Rebbe Rashab. So it was on a Shabbos. I think it was in the Nuns. And that Shabbos, a special guest came. He was a chaver and a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab, but they were also learned together when they were young. So the chassidim were looking out especially because they wanted to see the reunion between the two, the Rebbe Rashab and his, by the Rebbe Marash, they were children and they learned together, chavrusa. Like upon him, by the meals, Friday night meal and then Shabbos day, nothing, they didn't see anything dramatic happen. Came by Shalosh Sudas. So this older chassid started singing a nigun. I tried to ask around. I don't think I was able to ever establish which nigun it was. But he started singing a nigun that they were not familiar with. It was like one of the more obscure Chabad nigunim. And as he began singing, they entered the song, the Rebbe Rashab, everybody saw, went into like a trance, or what do you want to call it, transported to another time and place. You could see he was in a different place and time. And they sang, then finally the song came to an end. And even when it finished, the Rebbe Rashab still had his eyes closed. And then a few minutes passed, and the Rebbe Rashab opened his eyes. And this was the first time he greeted his chaver, so to speak, this chassid. And the Rebbe Rashab said, "Du gedenkst? You remember?" And the chassid answered, "Yeah, ich gedenk. I remember." And that was it. The meal ended, Shabbos ended, and that Motzei Shabbos, the chassid passed away. Later, they asked the Rebbe Rashab, what was going on here? What was the story? She said that the last time him and I were together were with my father, and we were by the Tish, Shabbos Tish. And this song was sung then. We sung this song by my father by the table. And that was a nigun that, nigun has a way of connecting people, uniting people. And it's now, what did he say, at least 25 years later. So when he started singing the nigun, it brought me back in Tov Reish, I think Chof Ches or Tov Reish Chof Tes. And lamash, like as if time never passed. So all I needed to hear was Ebe gedenkt. Once he said a gedenkt, I didn't need to say Shalom Aleichem to him because we never had parted ways. The nigun transcended the time and space exactly as it was back then in Tov Reish Chof Ches, now Tov Reish Nun Ches, something like that 30 years later. And one of the ways we experience the Rebbe is when you sing a nigun, especially like Alter Rebbe's nigun. And today there are videos, but those of us that remember, you saw the Rebbe go into a different space in some of these nigunim, especially Alter Rebbe's nigun. And these things get frozen in time, that even though many things happen in between and over and under, I'm sure a lot of things, we all gotten older. But it's maybe it doesn't take a lot of effort, maybe a little effort, to reconnect as if the time never. So there's one thing you remember something. People have memories, but it's another as if time never passed. Sometimes I walk in 770, and I walk a place where I knew the Rebbe walked many times, out of shul or into shul or by the Farbrengens. And sometimes, it's the middle of the night or whatever, there's nothing happening there. And you sometimes feel, this is a place that that was the center of the universe. So when the Rebbe danced, the Rebbe spoke, the Rebbe cried, the Rebbe smiled. And, any Basar, we don't see, it's like, it looks like plain. I remember reading the first time Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Tafshin Yud Aleph. The Rebbe wrote a letter almost a year from the Histalkus of Yud Shvat Tafshin Yud. So Rosh Chodesh Shvat Tafshin Yud Aleph, you have to read this letter. It's a short letter. And the Rebbe writes, over kayit, kol kayitz, over cheref, the summer passed, the winter passed. Vesazman esa asher as es asher shashalei, and time does its thing. You forget. You want to believe and feel that Rebbe Chassidus, in a sense, can reveal that some things don't change at all. And even though we are simple people, we see external changes, but the etzem doesn't change. One of the most powerful sichos that the Rebbe was Vayikra Tov Shemem Zayin. If I may, it's the only time we ever got a compliment from the Rebbe. We usually got a lot of critique, good critique, chesed shebe chesed, but never, very rarely. This is the only time I ever got a compliment. But the Rebbe wrote on the Sikha that Higdilu Lases, that, was impressive. And what is the Sikha about? About the Nitzchis of Nisim. It was right a few months after Heitevis, the court case. Heitevis Mem Zayin, this was Vayikra Mem Zayin. And the Rebbe brings there a story from Tafresh Pei, the first mimer the Frierdiker Rebbe ever delivered. So he talks about Kedusha Le'Zazimim Kema, Kedusha never changes. Like the Kosel Marav right now, Kosel, Harabais, there's no Beis HaMikdash, but you're not allowed to walk there. Because some things are Nitzchi, Le'Zazimim Kema. Even though Rabbi Reuven Dunin Olav Shalom once told somebody he was going to New York for Tishrei. So he met someone at the airport that he knew in the military. And he said, "Where are you going for Tishrei?" He says, "I'm going to the Rebbe." He says, "What do you mean? We have the Kesel Maravi here. You have Yerushalayim Mirakedesh. Kedusha Le'Zazimim Kema." So Reuven Dunin said to him, Ani be'emet, ani ken rotzeh is a kedusha shekein zaz mizman lizman. That he wants a kedusha that does sometimes, that's not just completely frozen. Okay, that's a hergish. So the Rebbe there brings the Sikha, the Maimer rather. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, the first Maimer he said after the Rebbe Rashab was nostalgic, talks about Kedush Le'Zazimim Kema. But he tells a story, the Frierdiker Rebbe, that when he was 4 or 5 years old, he was in the room, the Chedi Yechidus of the Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Rashab walks in, and he's dressed with a kapot, all the levushim and a gartel, and he's standing by the table speaking to Rebbe Marash, exactly as he did B'chayov. This was as Be'erech, I think he says Be'erech Tafresh Mem Daler or Mem Hey. So the Frierdiker Rebbe would have been 4 or 5, and it was after the Stalkus, which was Mem Gimel. So he says, and my father was standing there, exactly like B'chayov, and crying, Zolgu Einev Demoyes, tears coming from his eyes. And that he brings as a raya of Kalim of Atzilus, that Kedusha Le'Zazimim came. That the very table and the furniture and the chair and even the tashmish, not just the Rebbe, his physical objects that he worked with, that he learned on and so on, retain their Kedusha. One of the big things in Chassidus, one of the big themes, is that everything in this world is a nifsit, kol hever nifsit. Everything is subject to mortality. Everything erodes, deteriorates, and then perishes. The famous Bachai that Chassidus cites, and the Rebbe says, Ulai, we don't have the exact place, the source, that Tinuk, Mishaneled, Maschel is Yavish. A child doesn't start aging when we're 80 years old or 70 or 60. You start aging the second you're born. However, you don't see the aging yet, because you can't be 30 if you're not 20. You can't be 80 if you were not. So aging starts because this world, Tzva ha'aretz, is kayom be'min, but not be'ish. And Chassidus makes a big thing about it. This is one of the ways, sumar menechem, because when you see Nitzchi, that's a siman of Elikuz, because the only thing that can be eternal is something that doesn't have a beginning, so it doesn't have an end. It's not subject to mortality. You know, you learn in Chassidus, it's a concept, it's good for his bonanus, Gadlus Habeda, or the Rambam, Eketzid Yovei, Heich Yovdem Yovei La'avosi L'Rosei, Mizbeinen. But for Chassidim, it really comes down to eternity in our lives. We believe Yichud Zen Yitzchi Le'elam Vod, L'mayel Le'elam Vod, and that there are things that do not change. And it's like a Iker Shebe Iker. I remember it was Gimel Tammuz was Sunday, right? Mitzvah Shabbos, the first. 2 days later, I was on Larry King. I'm not here dropping names, Larry King, but I was CNN. And it was about the Rebbe. It was a live satellite. So you're sitting in this room, there's no people, it's only cameras. So it's a little disorienting. Larry King asked me this question. I wasn't ready for it. It was live. I had to answer spontaneously. Now, I was sitting, you know, they do these shows. They always have a counter, a person who's not a Chabadnik, let's put it that way. And so it was myself, Shalom Lipsker from Miami, and Nadler, if you remember him. So anyway, so Larry King asked this question. Everything's very quick. It's like 30-second answers. He says, Rabbi Jacobson, I need to understand something. We understand that Chabad community is very saddened by the tragic death of the Rebbe. But why are you shocked? Everybody dies. You know, I understand sadness, grief. Of course, we mourn, we grieve. Why are you so shocked? That was his question. You know, you have to be quick on the feet because you have to answer, and you can't just dreh a cup. You know, like say, you know what, I'll get back to you. And you have to say it also in the ACs that I'm miskablis. So I said, well, you have to remember, for us, the Rebbe embodied Torah. And Torah is eternal. It went through the Holocaust, it went through the pogroms, it went through the Inquisitions, it went through the Crusaders, it went through the destruction of the temples. And still standing. So when mortality touches immortality, it's more than just sad, it's a shock. That's what I said. Then there was a break for an ad, and Nadler was sitting near me. He wasn't exactly a Oyev Chabad, let's put it this way. He says to me, immortality. So I said, hey, Mr. Nadler, it's your turn next, go ahead and rebut it. He says, no, I'm not that stupid. First of all, everybody's sympathies are with you guys now, so I'm not going to. And secondly, the way you put it, what am I supposed to say? The Rebbe is not Torah. I'm going to say the Rebbe and Torah is not immortal. He just says, I see you're a clever guy. You know how to package it. That sounds right. You know, that's what anyway, he didn't rebut it because what is he going to say exactly? It's true. Torah is nitzchi. So if you turn the Rebbe into human is one thing, but if the Rebbe is embodiment of Torah, it is a shock when you see a net as inyan nitzchi, so to speak, behalam. So at the end of the day, Chassidus teaches us that you could have nitzchias in this material, impermanent world. Everything dies. Money dies, your looks, physical things, they all will go through changes. By us Chassidim, when you stand in front of a Rebbe, you're standing in something nitzchi. That does not die. Because it's not subject to the laws of nature. It's subject, it's an inyan of Elokus. And Elokus is Atem adveikim Hashem Elokeichem Chaim Kulchem Hayem. And I just want to say, it feels proud to be connected to something nitzchi. L'chaim. gauge it tonight.
Chaim Levracha. Shekayach, Rav Simon, all the Varim Averter. Shekayach for giving me a small intermission for Rav
The rest of
Simon.
the night is yours.
It's just a small break before Rav Simon continues. If you look at the history of Yutas Kislev, the Suda, the celebration of Yutas Kislev, so you find that one of the big themes of a Suda Yutas Kislev was retelling the story of how the Alter Rebbe was arrested and how he came to be freed. A combination of Teichen and the story, the history. There are a number of Yungalite scholars of Chassidus Chabad that have released a small publication called Merchav, a small internal publication. There are Malakat recently, a few of these articles that were written in the Jewish press 100 years ago and more, not necessarily the religious Jewish press, but every once in a while you had someone who wanted to give a literary expression to the memories they had from in their Heim, what Yiddishkeit, what Chassidishkeit was like. It was interesting to take a look to see how they describe the Seudah, the Farbrengen of Yutas Kislev. So for example, in the year Samach Beis, 1902, someone who describes the following scene says, it was Yutas Kislev, all the Chassidim gathered to celebrate the holiday, the Chag HaCherus, and to tell the following generation what happened. What happened to the Alter Rebbe? So the character in the story, little Yisrael, would climb up on the wall, some kind of spot emanating from the wall. He climbed up to catch every detail. He didn't want to miss a detail of the story. And all the Chassidim are standing together. They're pushing, they're squeezing. They want to hear the story. They don't want to miss a single word. They've heard the story, of course, every single year. They know they can tell you the story by heart. But every year it was like they heard the story for the first time. The place was silent. The candles, there was no electricity. The candles are casting a shadow over all the attendees. And the Alter Chassid, whoever it was who got the schus, the kibud of telling the story. So this is how this is the quote. This is the description. This is what it would have sounded like if you were there over 120 years ago. Avigdor, the Treifene Mesnaged Yamach Shmoi. He went to Peterburg and he baret Alter Rebbe that Zalman Baruchovich has rebelled against the Tsar. So the Tsar put out a decree and they arrested the Alter Rebbe. Oh, all the Chassidim in the audience, they felt it. And they said, oh, revenge. We have to take revenge against the descendants, the Eneklach of Avigdor. Eiche Yisrael Yamach Shmoi. They took it very personally. They were experiencing it. Another author, another writer describes 10 years later, Tafresh Ayin Beis, 1912. He's also describing the scene. He describes how the Rav, wherever the Chassidish Rav of wherever the story is set, emerges. They say L'chaim. And the Rav begins with the tradition, the Minig HaMekubal, to say the whole story, what happened with the Alter Rebbe. Starts off with, of course, the Halshana of Avigdor Yamach Shmoi, till the Alter Rebbe, the Rav, was in jail in Tfisa, and then, of course, it culminates with the big day, Yutas Kislev. And from there, the Rav went on to describe the Far Peterburg and Nach Peterburg. It's interesting to see that already in 1912, in the secular press, that's already the description of the day. There's Far Peterburg, Nach Peterburg. So we see the way they describe the scene, the way they set the scene, the way they describe the Farbrengenischen. There was Teichen, they spoke about Far Peterburg, Nach Peterburg, Chassidish Nyanim, but there's also, the story was a very integral part of the Farbrengen. And in the story itself, an integral part, one could say, is the emphasis on the villain, Avigdor Yamach Shmoi. In fact, if you look in Sefer HaNegunim, if you actually look in our Svarim and our Mekaydes, if you look in Sefer HaNegunim, Nigun Pei Daled, Nigun Nigun Peidal, I believe. So it says, Nigun Peidal is Shoshanas Yaakov. Okay, Shoshanas Yaakov is a Purim Dik Nigun. But then it adds something in the Sefer Nagunim in the beginning where it describes each song. It says, V'gam sharu oisoi b'chag yutas Kislev b'shinui yatevis. They changed a few words. They modified a few of the lyrics. So instead of Shoshanas Yaakov, it was Shoshanas Chsidim. Instead of Baruch Mordechai, it was Baruch the Alter Rebbe. And instead of Oror Haman, it was Oror Avigdor HaMaser. That's what it says in Sefer HaNagunim. And the entry for Shoshanas Yaakov. In fact, someone shared today a recording of a Farbrengen in Montreal a few decades ago where they kept up the minhag. They sing Shoshanas Yaakov out to Kislev Farbrengen with these words. The guy of this niggin, Hanani Yosef Eisenbach, recounts, he shares that he heard from Rabbi Yankel Landau, the Rav of Bnei Brak, at a Farbrengen of Yutas Kislev. Yankel Landau, of course, was by the Rebbe Rashab. So Rabbi Yankel Landau recounted that he was once by the Rebbe Rashab, and they taka, lefi this minhag, they sang Shoshanas Chasidim Tzalav Samecha, and then they got to Oror Avigdor. So one of the Chashavei Rabbanim was there, and he felt a little discomfort, he felt uncomfortable. And he said, this is how we're talking about a Yid. So the Rebbe Rashab said, Neshama, aber wie guckt sie euch? How does this Neshama look? What kind of Neshama are we talking about? Yen Neshama. That was the Rebbe Rashab's reaction. The Rebbe Rashab defended the practice, the nusach of the niggin. On the other hand, there's an interesting Rishima. Someone wrote a Yechidus down from the Rebbe, from Tovshim and Beis. The Rebbe said as follows. The Rebbe said, my Shver, the Rebbe the Shver. Of course, Yutas Kislev came along. He would speak about Yutas Kislev with the Bren. And Yutas Kislev was celebrated with the Greis Shturim. And the Rebbe would get a little into the story, the Alter Rebbe, the Talmidim. The Rebbe pointed out, the Rebbe said in this Yechidus, the Rebbe never mentioned, one thing the Rebbe never mentioned in his recounting, he never mentioned Avigdor, who was the Moiser, the Malshin of the Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe skipped that part. Then the Rebbe continued in the Yechidus, and he said that that when they used to Farbrengen Yutas Kislev, so this Avigdor would show up, and he would say, I also want l'chaim, give me a l'chaim also. They said, what connection do you have? How do you're joining the Yutas Kislev Farbrengen? He said, what do you mean? If not for me, there would be no Farbrengen. I'm a mechutten, I'm the hype mechutten here, this Farbrengen, give me l'chaim. So they gave him l'chaim. This is what the Rebbe told someone in Yechidus and Tovshim and Beis. And there are many other Lubavitch and Mekaydes about Avigdor's end, Mias Asaf. But if you take a look, if you take a search, from what I could see, if you search the Fidik Rebbe Sichas, Kamat, not a single mention of Avigdor and Kal V'chomer, the Rebbe Sichas, not the focus. Oh, the Beis Rebbe, when the Beis Rebbe talks about it, by the way, the Beis Rebbe, he mentions Avigdor a few times, but a few years ago they printed a Madura Kama of the Beis Rebbe, a first draft, and every time it mentions his name in the first draft, it also says Avigdor Yimach Shmoi. But I guess when he printed it, he sanitized it a little bit. In Beis Rebbe, he mentions that, by the way, his two sons were Chassidim, and they were so embarrassed by their family history that when they got an Aliyah, they would call them by their Shver's name. They didn't even want to be called Ben Avigdor to the Torah. Yeah, and they had an Einakol, a Zera Choshev Einakol, a very Chassidish Yid, a Rav. So that's what the Beis Rebbe writes. And he writes in a footnote, we see B'nei Banim Shel Haman Lam the Torah B'nei Brak. So, B'derech Afshir, what explains the shift? By the Rebbe Rashab is still defending the niggin, and then we don't sing this niggin l'chayra by the Fidik Rebbe and the Rebbe, we don't emphasize this. Yesh Leimar, B'derech Afshir, that if you look in earlier Mekaydes, so how do you define Yutas Kislev? We celebrate Yutas Kislev as a Yom Tov. How does that fit into the Hagdaras of Yiddishkeit? What kind of Yom Tov is this? So we have a gather of Purim. There's Purim, Morocco, Spain, Egypt. There's different Purims, different communities. They had a Tzara, they had a Nes. You celebrate Purim. So you could say Yutas Kislev fit into that bracket, into that category. You take a find earlier Chabad Mekaydes that compare Yutas Kislev to Chanukah, to Purim. How's it the same? How's it different? So if you're describing it in that way, so it makes sense to describe, to emphasize there's a hero, there's a villain, there's a tzaddik, there's a rasha. But Ken Zayin, Yishloima, that after Rebbe Rashab came and emphasized that Yitas Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, so it could be that shifted the emphasis away. We don't have to focus mamish on this element.
What year was the defense of mental Avigdor?
It doesn't say what year the Rebbe Rashab said that. By the way, if we're speaking about this, we should point out that there's actually a bit of a confusion here, a bit of a historical confusion, because we know that Alter Rebbe was arrested twice. It was the first arrest in Tavkuf Nun Tes, Yutas Kislev, but then there was a second arrest 2 years later in Samach Aleph around the same time of the year. Alter Rebbe was released, or at least released from jail around Hanukkah time, and then he had to stay in Peterburg for many more months, till towards the end of the year when he got permission to move, and then he moved to Liadi. So if you look in earlier Makaidas like Beis Rebbe, so the way Beis Rebbe tells the story of Yitas Kislev is that Avigdor went and he mastered the Alter Rebbe, and it's describing the first arrest. And when he cuts to the second arrest, he says it's not clear exactly what the details were. Was the Alter Rebbe in jail? Was the Alter Rebbe not in jail? Not fully clear. But with the fall of communism, many of the documents of the Alter Rebbe's arrest were released. The documents include even the Ksaviyat of the Alter Rebbe's responses to the government interrogation, to the Malshinus. So it seems, now that we have the documentation, that we don't know who the Malshin was in the first arrest. It seems to have been someone anonymous. Even the government never found out who it was. It was a fake name. And Dafka, the second arrest, that's the one where Avigdor was Malshin Alter Rebbe by name, and the whole back and forth is almost just a showdown between these two individuals, the Avigdor and the Alter Rebbe, and they're confronting each other, and Alter Rebbe is responding to Avigdor's tainus. That was the second arrest in Samach Aleph. In Kerem Chabad, where a lot of these documents were published, so he writes that in Beis Rebbe, he mentions Avigdor in the context of the first arrest. He writes, though, that it's clear that that's not quite the case. It could still be, though, that Avigdor was already involved in some informal way. And in fact, we see from Avigdor's writings the second time around that he seemed to be familiar, intimately familiar, with the details of the back and forth from the first arrest. But this tradition is, we see that by the Yutas Kislev, they sang and they spoke about Avigdor. So it's almost as if the two events sort of merged into one event. And in fact, there is Taka Kamat, not any Zecher left to marking the Alter Rebbe's release the second time. In Kerem Chabad, he discusses about how there might have been a tradition to mark it during Hanukkah, the fifth Lichtel of Hanukkah, may have had something to do with Alter Rebbe's release the second time. But there's almost no Zecher left to that, so it's like the Yutas Kislev covers both. Taka, last year, we spoke a bit about the Alter Rebbe's responses in the first arrest. There we have the Alter Rebbe's Ksaviyad in Hebrew, detailed responses to every taina. But today, to be Mekayim, the Inyan of the tradition of telling the story of Yitas Kislev with Avigdor and Alter Rebbe, a combination of both, we're going to focus a little bit on the tainus in the second arrest and Alter Rebbe's responses, which in this case we have mostly through translation. You look in Beis Rebbe, he describes the drama behind the scenes. There was a lot of, they were sort of trying to get control over who would get to translate the Alter Rebbe's responses. Would the Chassidim translate it and it would be accurate, or would the Misnagdim translate it and it would be inaccurate? L'maisa, we have the translation. Before we get to it, there are some that say, how do we know that the Alter Rebbe is answering honestly? Maybe the Alter Rebbe, when you're dealing with the government, you have to, should we be ma'ayin so much on what the Alter Rebbe said? So one of the only places, one of the single places where the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Derech Agav, mentions Avigdor is in the Rishimis of the Rebbe, from what the Frierdiker Rebbe was telling him in ear of Tzadik Aleph. The Frierdiker Rebbe tells the Rebbe that he saw a Ksaviyat Kodesh of the Tzemach Tzedek. And this Ksaviyat Kodesh of the Tzemach Tzedek, for some reason, it hasn't been documented. We haven't seen it since. But the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe that he had the Ksaviyat Kodesh, and it begins, Ma Shemosar Avigdor. So you see that Tzemach Tzedek is also being oisek in this. What was Avigdor's Mesirah, the Tzemach Tzedek writes? So one of the things that's also mentioned in Beis Rebbe is that the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, is being mo'orer af on the Melucha and Shemoneh Esrei. When the Alter Rebbe died on Shemoneh Esrei, it seems that he's trying to awaken divine retribution against the government. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote that the Alter Rebbe said that if he wanted, he could just deny it. You know, it's his word against their word. It's not true. But the Alter Rebbe didn't even want to deny it because they said it to shame the Baal Shem Tov. And the Alter Rebbe didn't want to be nifred, separate, to put any distance, any daylight between him and the Baal Shem Tov and Chassidus. And the Tzemach Tzedek, Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to describe how the Tzemach Tzedek writes that the Malshinus was that he was saying af. During the Zbaininus in Shemoneh Esrei, Itaka was saying af. So now Victor said af means that he's being ma'eder af chema dinim on the government. So the Alter Rebbe explained that no, af in French means a monkey. And during Shemoneh Esrei, you're supposed to have bittul. Amal, Aves, Vanachnu Ma, different psukim, that was true bittul. Our bittul is like a kekayf b'fnei Adam. So I'm saying af to tell you that whatever bittul we have is kekayf b'fnei Adam. Okay, is that taka the pshat? But we see this idea that the Alter Rebbe didn't want to say something that was mafred him from the Baal Shem Tov. So it doesn't seem like there's anything that the Alter Rebbe would write that would be shalei kafi ha'emes, at least in terms of putting any distance between what the Chassidus teaches and how the Alter Rebbe is explaining it. So I just want to take a look at one example, the first and second taina of Avigdor, and how the Alter Rebbe responded. That'll be enough for this time. So Avigdor was using as his source the Sefer Tzavois Harivash. We know at that time there weren't that many Chassidish Sfarim, but one of the earliest Chassidish Sfarim was a Sefer called Tzavois Harivash, which is advertised as the Baal Shem Tov Tzava. We know famously the Alter Rebbe in Geras HaKodesh. Here also we'll see the Alter Rebbe says it's not quite the way it's advertised. But that was considered, you wanted to know what are Hasidic teachings. So at that time you got a copy of Tzavos Harivash. That was your source of information. We know, historically, there were public burnings of Tzavos Harivash in Vilna. That was considered the Chassidish Sefer. So if you look in Tzavos Harivash, in Ois Kuf Yud, it says, Laved es Hashem beyiru b'simcha. You have to serve Hashem with joy. And there should be no tsar. There should be no pain, discomfort, agony. Like Tamid yeh b'simcha. Right? Before the Baal Shem Tov Zainakol came along with Mitzvah Gedolah, Tamid yeh b'simcha, the Lashon and Tzavos Harivash. Again, later, a few oasis later, v'yeh Tamid b'simcha. And again, another oasis says, Laharchek, you should distance yourself from Atzvos, v'yeh libay sameach b'Hashem. So it sounds like we should always be extremely happy and jolly. So Avigdor, we have the Tainus that he wrote. So Avigdor writes that in the book of the cult of the Karliner, that was the nickname the Misnagdim had at the time, the Karliner.
Intellectual property. So when my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, was published, I've not shared this so much, but it's a very interesting insight. So I met with the publisher and I said, look, this is 1994, you have to remember. It was right after Gimel Tammuz. And I said, I need you to know that there in so-called, in the Chabad world, there may be differences of opinion. And some people may not like the idea that I'm writing a book. So I just don't want you to find out later, so I want to be totally transparent that you may have some complaints. I didn't know if there would be or there wouldn't be. I just didn't want having a very big deal with a large company. I didn't want later Achil Hashem, so I wanted them to know up front. So they said to me, look, we're owned by the Hearst Corporation. Hearst Corporation owns around 200 newspapers, around 100 magazines, big publisher of many books, and we have a whole building of hundreds of lawyers that just involved in questions like this. Things like copyright law. Every day you can imagine, if you have so many newspapers, every day you're getting a letter from somebody that they were libeled or they were slandered or you stole their copyright. This is part of the business. So they had me meet with three people, three lawyers. And this is where I appreciate Alter Rebbe's godless. Sometimes, you needed Yisrei to proceed Matan Torah. You need to have a goy who's seen the whole world to appreciate Yisrei Ne'er Min HaCheshech. So I said to them, okay, so they asked me this question. The first question they asked me is, when the Rebbe would teach or speak, did he charge money? So I said, no. I said, was it expected that people pay money? No. So anybody can come here and speak without any charge? I said, absolutely. Jew, non-Jew, everybody. Completely open. Okay. Was it expected later that when any payment? So I said, no. People did come to see the Rebbe, and some people gave him money, some people didn't give him money. But there was no requirement. So I remember there was three lawyers. One was Jewish, two were not. Oh, sorry, two were Jewish, one was not. The one that was not says, okay. So then the rabbi, meaning the Rebbe, is like Moses. He also didn't charge when he taught the Bible. Yeah? Like Moses. And the Bible is not copyrightable. Nobody can own, no one owns the Bible. You can't sue someone you could sue someone for the design, for the typeface, but not for the content. So they say, so then since it's his teachings and he wants it to be free, that tells you something, that he doesn't want it to be owned by anybody. So right away, what clicked in my mind, the Medrash, why was the Torah given in a midbar? It's a strange place to give the Chem de Gnuza. If you wanted to give someone a very special gift, you wouldn't take them into a hot desert that's 120 degrees or hotter, and it's a Lo Yoshav Adam Shom, a place of no civilization. You take them to a nice restaurant, you take them to Alexandria, to Rome, to Jerusalem. There are a lot of nice cities in the world. The Eibishter takes them into a midbar, Nachashar v'akriv, a midbar shmama, gives them the Torah. Says that one of the reasons the Medrash says is because midbar is a mokum hefker. It's no man's land. You lose an object in a midbar, nobody can lay claim to it because it's nobody's property. The Eibishter did not want anyone to later claim and say, imagine if the Torah was given Yerushalayim. The Yerushalmi would come claim every time you give a Torah class, we want royalties. Eibishter gave it in a place nobody can lay claim. Basically, it's not a maflega. It's God's Torah given to the world. Everybody can learn it. It's Hashem is giving us His blueprint for life. They tell that joke. It's like an anti-rabbi joke, which has truth to it to some extent. And it is like this. A guy comes to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, I hear that the Torah has the answers to all the secrets of life. Sure. Says, will you teach it to me? Of course. How much will it cost? Says, how could I charge you? God didn't charge us. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't charge us. How could I charge you? So he's doubly impressed. Maybe tell them to go outside. So he's doubly impressed. He's getting the secrets of life. It's for free. When do you get the secret? Is everything for free? Okay, so they sit down and they open up a Torah. It's in Hebrew. So the rabbi says Hebrew lessons will be $20,000. Okay, there's a catch. Alter Rebbe Chassidus is like Teres Emes, not like, it is Teres Emes. And it's not a maflega, it's not a corporation. So there's corporate Chabad, which I don't identify with, frankly, because what does it have to do with Chassidus? What does it have to do with Ashkafe? And then there's Teres Chabad. What the Alter Rebbe was saying, that he's not here to open another company to sell Chassidus. He's here to reveal the Pnimis HaTeira that will bring Chayas to every Jew. And it belongs to everybody. And doesn't belong more to Chabad Chassidim than it does to Chagas Chassidim or to Litvaks, or for that matter to any Jew on this earth, and if you want, even to every human being on earth. It's a major thing because most of us think in terms of this is my company, and my company is not that company. That doesn't exist in truth. Now, I know a lot of people in the establishment may not like this, but it's not me that said it. The Alter Rebbe said it's not a maflega. And I think the Alter Rebbe has a pretty much right to establish how he wants Chassidus Chabad to go. Would you agree? And he's the final say. So I just thought it's important because I find it to be a very freeing statement, because it really means that Chassidus is for everybody, and whether you call yourself a Chabadnik or not makes no difference. You don't need to be a card-carrying member or dress like a Chabad Chassid, however a Chabad Chassid dresses, which itself is open for debate, to learn Chassidus. It doesn't have anything that has a label around it. Just like we don't say a neshama is a maflega. Everybody has a neshama, everybody's got a soul. I think it's a very important thing to emphasize today, because you don't want to get caught up in a type of bureaucracy and corporate perspective. Chassidus is hashkafa. Chassidus is divrei Elokim Chaim. And divrei Elokim Chaim and partisan is astira minei bay, because it's about Elokus, and Elokus is not partisan. Elokus is the emes havaya le'elam, is the truth of everything. So it's like say that Eibush is only Elokus only. It's Ein Malvade. It's not Elokus in one company and another company doesn't have it. Taper the whole inyan. And as soon as Torah gets packaged like a bureaucracy and like a maflega, it's already missing the whole point. And that's why the Torah was given in a midbar, and it really is the domain of every one of us. So just wanted to share that thought. I think it's important to underscore. You know, it's Megala Tefach Mechaset Fachayim Yesher Memasha Amarti. There's a lot more behind this, and I hope as you'll see in your own evolution of your own shlichus, wherever you end up being, I think you can appreciate the points that this can be very helpful to understand the Rebbe's approach to things. Now, just in case it's misunderstood, I'm not suggesting that it's hefke pefke and everybody can do whatever they want. There is a teir and halacha of how we establish things, but nobody has a monopoly, and nobody owns shlichus, and nobody owns chassidus, and nobody owns the Rebbe, and nobody owns the Rebbe's pu'ulas and miftzayim and all the inyonim, because it's all not a maflega, as the Alter Rebbe said. And again, you still need to have a seder. You don't want to have achleikus in a Sikha Mishpatim Tov Shemem Zayin. The Rebbe explains, you know, how shluchim should interact with each other if they think there's asogas gvul or so on. There's a whole Sikha about it. So we have from the Rebbe here on that as well. I just wanted to state that. I think it's important to state, and that's why I feel that any one of you, I think this is, you know, getting down to the Hira B'Peil, Yitas Kislev. It really comes down to this. We have to ask ourselves one question only. What are you doing tonight and tomorrow morning to bring Chassidus to the world? Alter Rebbe sat in prison and suffered and went through a lot of challenges in order to be Megalech Chassidus. And then it was finally vindicated. So it's the Geula of Chassidus. We live in a world today, there's 8 billion people, approximately. There are 14.5 million Yidden Ken Yirbu. How many of them have been affected by Chassidus? I'll ask ourselves a better question. How many of us have been affected? So if you don't mind, I'll ask, since it's already after midnight, and we can ask a little controversial questions like the Rebbe said, it's Shatten. I think this is the hour that the Rebbe said from 12 to 1 is called, is a Narish Shah. That's what Alter, yeah. I don't know if the Rebbe distinguishes. I'll tell you, the story goes like this. Rabbi Fegelstock, who headed Beis Rivka in Montreal for many years, so he decided either the chavis, he had chavis, machlekes, all kinds of things. Like every moisid goes through its challenges. he decided enough is enough. He called Rabbi Chadikov in New York. He wants to go into the Rebbe in Yechidus. Rabbi Chadikov says, when do you want to go? The earlier the better. Okay, tomorrow night. What? Tomorrow night, between 12 and 1, you're going into Yechidus. So he drove down from Montreal to New York. He arrives. He himself tells the story. And I talk at 12 to 1. Sometime between 12 and 1, he's in Yechidus. Tells the Rebbe that he's worked in this meister for a long time. And Migia Mayim Ad Nofesh, the Chavis, the debts, fighting. He doesn't. So he came here to tell the Rebbe here the keys, and the Rebbe should find someone to replace him. So the Rebbe said to him, who's going to take over? So that's why I'm giving it to the Rebbe. I didn't want to just drop it. So the Rebbe looked at him and said the following. Der Schwer hat gesagt, als von 12 bis 1 ist ein narischer Schau. Aber als eine Narischkeit, habe ich kein Mensch vorgestellt. That from 12 to 1 is a foolish hour, but such foolishness I never would have imagined. Had I known that you're coming down here to tell me this, I never would have let you come in. The Yechidus. So you're a Chrayis, what's you know. So we always wondered, why is it a Narish Shah 12 to 1? I mean, it's I'll get back to what I wanted to say. Like, why is it, what means a Narish Shah? So I have a theory, you could maybe have another theory. Those of us that are night birds, I mentioned before, Shmuel Munkus, the Nacht in the Shamas. And like some of us, we start getting alive like 1 a.m. Others are tight asleep by 11. They're in their pajamas by 10 or 9 or 8, I don't know. Like a laser, when you get into pajamas, like 7 o'clock. You ready? Okay, fine. Now, a Nachfegel knows that, you like to be up at night. The Rebbe, by the way, was a night person more. The Rebbe we know from the Rebbe would take a small nap, like sometimes like 6, 7 in the morning. But the Rebbe was usually up all night. We saw that when the Rebbe was in his room after the stalkus of the Rebbetzin. I remember walking always 4 a.m., the lights were on, and we also knew the Rebbe was Magia the Sicha, would come at 4 or 5 a.m., and the Rebbe was working all night. But regardless, I'm not going to categorize the Rebbe. The Rebbe was a day and night person, fine, but I mean to say, so maybe here's the Yesh Leimer. So when does the change of the guard from the day people to the night people? So like till 10, 11, you could still say it's the domain of the day people. After 2 a.m., for sure the night people. But maybe between 12 and 1, because the guard is changing, we don't really know. So it's like a Narish Shah, because you can't figure out. It's like Chatzeis, aher, nishtahin, nishtahin. Like, I don't know if you've ever been up all night in Crown Heights. I don't know about these days. But like 5, 6 a.m., you'll see the vampires start coming out of their graves. Like the shuls, the people who sit all night talk about Nietzsche and philosophy and Herzl, and they go, as they're leaving, going to sleep like 6 a.m., you have the early birds walking up Kingston Avenue, going to mikveh and going to daven. So there's a change of guard in the morning, and there's a change in the evening. So maybe between 12 and 1 is a narish. I mean, that's just my little sociological theory. Take it or leave it. But begay to the pale, since it's between 12 and 1, so we can get away and say certain things now, right? And say like Sinishtahir, Nishtahir. The twilight zone. It's the twilight zone. The Zagat says there's 3 days about Bein Hashmoshes. Is it half day, half night? Is it neither? Is it both? Or is it like a Kedon Zovius? It just meets, day and night meet, and doesn't really have a mitzias. You do it, Allah Mefarshim, that are chayker in the scene. So why was I saying it? Yutes Kislev, Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. Let's talk a little, practical. I'm talking to myself, and you're just listening in, okay? So the Musa is to me, you take the good stuff. The one question has to be asked. What are you and what am I doing to bring Chassidus more to the world than till now? Now, I know some people say we've already conquered the world. Every Kinus HaShluchim, we already say that. Coca-Cola, Chabad, and that's it. The difference is, there may be nothing in between, but it's a pretty big difference in the numbers. So, I'll share Ramotel Chain Olav Shalom. Every time I walked in 770 when he was around, he would always tell me, Rab Simon, you travel around the world, you know mit schon eingenommen die ganze Welt. So I say to him, how do you know? He says, look, every taxi cab in Israel has a picture of the Rebbe, and every falafel shop has a picture. That's a pretty big sign, right? So I said to him, Ramotel, if I may ask you, you ever hear of China? We're talking in Yiddish. The Chineser. He says, Chineser? Wie viel Chineser sind schon da? How many Chinese are there? I said, 1.8 billion. He said, billion? It's a million. I said, billion. Okay, the kleine Gelle Chineser. Fine. He dismissed them like that. So I said, what about the Indians? He said, they were killed out already. I said, I'm not talking about the Indians in America. I'm talking about the country called India, Haidu. How many people? I said, 1.5 billion. He said, you mean the guys that sell, that do Dell customer service? He thought, and they drive Ubers? I said, I don't know, there's some of them are Pakistanis, I think also. But, okay, so basically you dismissed 1.8, 1.5, that's 3.3 billion. Half the world, okay. Now, let's take the other half. My point was, he was a very fine Jew, but he walked on Kingston Avenue. It's called Tunnel Vision, the echo chamber of Crown Heights. You hear some news in Cannes, and then you repeat it in the mikveh, and then of course in the kollel. We hear it's called an echo chamber. You hear the Zelbanais. How do you know what happens? A beferish is COL. What do you mean? Okay, but there's a bigger world. I'm not suggesting you have to know there's a bigger world, but I can tell you this: Mola Odes Deus Hashem is not just Kingston Avenue and Borough Park and Williamsburg and Muncie and Lakewood and Toms River, or now Miami and Atlanta and Baltimore and all the other booming Jewish populations. There's a big world out there. Now, I say it's the way it is. I mean, if you look at the sichos of the Rebbe, from Tovshin Mem till Tovshin Nun, and that was when I was working in sichos full time. I for a while back, I collected together all the sichos that Rebbe spoke on Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Neach. How many pages would you guess from Tovshin Mem to Tovshin Nun? How many pages? Not commentary, pure Hanochas, straight to Rebbe's mouth. How many pages would you guess would be those years? Not bad, 800 pages, which is basically 4 volumes. 800 pages is a lot of material. The Rebbe was definitely ahead of his time. That's what a Rebbe is, he's a visionary. If he's not ahead of his time, he's not a Rebbe. But how far back are we is the question. 30 years, 50 years? I don't think we've embraced the Rebbe's global vision. Almost kamat not. I'm not saying we can't appreciate it, but that's not how we think. We still think like ghetto Jews, except broader than most Jews because we've gone out in shlichus. We know how to talk to people on an airplane, even if they don't look like us. And most Jews don't know how to do that unless it's business. So it's true that we do have a little broader, but it's far cry. Just yesterday, a guy said to me, what am I supposed to say to a guy if I meet them? I said, you're a guy, you learned in yeshiva. You're asking me what you're supposed to say to a guy. And what do you say to a Jew? He says, a Jew I'll put on tefillin with. So I said, so a guy you don't put on tefillin with, talk to him about tzedakah. Talk to him about chesed. Talk to him about whatever, kindness. I don't know. Well, why is it's different mitzvahs? I mean, it's not. So because there's still I think a built-in, people don't like to say it openly, but it's almost a built-in thing that the Goyim are basically all potential Nazis. And we can't wait till Mashiach comes and they all, But I remember, B'Shalach Tovshin Mem Gimel, it's now Mugadik Sicha, and the Rebbe said in the middle of the Farbrengen, like almost Derech Agav, Mashiach is going to come, and Shendurgang and Alexadis, there won't be no need for any more Milchamas, there won't be a need anymore for any Ritzich, any dying. Everyone's going to be at peace. We're going to go into a peaceful transition into the future. Mashiach's coming. I remember right away, I heard that. So I always used to, whenever possible, the Rebbe wanted us to ask questions. So Sunday morning, the first thing, I wrote a note to the Rebbe. I said, what do you mean? The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, on Karker B'nai Sheis, that there's two opinions. 2/3 of the world will be killed. Or 2/3 of 2/3. Two opinions there. So how does that shim with what the Rebbe said? I mean, we asked, respectfully, like Tafasnu. And I remember the Rebbe sent out within a half hour, we used to get right away answers. The Rebbe writes, Bli noder yiduber b'zeh b'yisvadas kedesh haba aleinu l'teva. Shabbos kedesh haba aleinu l'teva. B'yisvadas haba aleinu, not Shabbos. Because the next Shabbos was yesterday, there was no Farbrengen. Mishpotim mem gimel Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about. Now, when the Rebbe wrote that, you knew he had a lot to say. Because if not, the Rebbe would write a short answer. If he's going to speak about it, it means there was a big thing. And I remember I was really looking forward to hear how the Rebbe is going to explain this. It's a Gemara, the Rebbe. Remember the second Sichem, Mishpatim Mem Gimel? The Rebbe says, mit gefrekt HaShaila, of was gered, from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. And the Rebbe said, I remember, I was like shocked almost. The Rebbe says, Ukerogel, kleibt man sich voneinander. The Kasha is nicht auf mir. The Kasha is auf the Gemara. That's what the Rebbe said. The question is on the Gemara. Why? The Eibishter is Rachem al Kol Maisov. How is it possible the Eibishter is going to kill 2/3 of his own people, of his own creatures? And I remember, I was trying to focus as a chayzer, so I couldn't spend time analyzing what the Rebbe said, but I right away said to myself, 1 second, how do you learn? How did anyone learn this Gemara till now? The Rebbe is asking, in other words, it's so dover poshed by the Rebbe that it can't mean kapshute, the kasha is on the Gemara. Okay, it takes the Rebbe to say that. And the Rebbe went, the whole Sikha, a long Sikha, became a Likud, later printed in Chelik Chov Gimel, Bolok, on this Pasuk. If you look at the end of the Sikha in Bolok, Chov Gimel, you'll see it's not a Bolok Sikha, it's Poshalach Mishpatim Em Gimel. So everybody asks, why did the Rebbe speak Mishal? Because of this reason. The Rebbe wasn't speaking of Bolok Sikha, he was speaking on this topic. And because of the question, the Rebbe developed the whole Sikha. And what did the Rebbe say, B'kitzur, at the end? First he said, maybe Pshat is that the Goyim won't be killed, but they'll die out and they won't have children. So it's not they're going to be killed, they'll die out. And the Rebbe said, that's also not Rachem al Kol Maisov. That's also not Rachem al Kol Maisov. Because what does that mean? Take a tzachzorius to not let them have children. And the Rebbe's final answer doesn't say misa, it says charker. Charker is from the word bittul, like by chulu, keloyin. That there will be a bittul mitzias, that the tzir will change. So it'll be a new mitzias, so that's why it's considered like man de nofel medarge ikremis is the expression. That when you change your mehus, it's like a new mitzias. Now, but tell me, what does this mean? That over the thousands of years, they learned the Pshat in Gemara Pasha because the Goyim were taka animals, Nazis, so they deserved to die. But if Chsidum is Elam, Yeshlam Chelik Le'elam Haba, you can't touch the Gemara that way anymore. So it's not like the Rebbe is changing Pshat in Gemara, but it's the changes in the Chefza Elam. The Rambam says, for example, he asks the question, since the Torah is Nitzchias, we can't be Mekayim Mechias Amalek or Mechias Leischai Kol Neshama. Because if we can't be Mekayim, that means the Torah is not Nitzchi. So the Rambam answers that there's no Shinui in the mitzvah, there's Shinui in the Elam, there's no Amalek anymore. There's no Shiva Amumis. So the Chefza changed. It's like saying, we can't today bring a korban. It's not a Shinui in the mitzvah, there's no ability to bring a korban. Anyway, the point being is that the Rebbe was saying the Chefza changed. So that, among hundreds of sikhs, I can tell you, when you start learning them, you see a whole different picture of the Rebbe and the world. Now, I'm not saying everybody here overnight is going to get a new picture, but I can tell you right now, if you really want to understand the Rebbe and what the Rebbe means the world is ready for Mashiach, let me ask you a question. How could the Rebbe say, Otot kommt Mashiach, and you just have to open your eyes when 2/3 of the world have to die? That doesn't take overnight. That means it's a process. So you have to say the Rebbe holds that the Goyish world right now are kelim for Geula, or else all these sikhs don't make sense. It's not possible. It would require a tremendous miracle that suddenly 8 billion people are receptive to Geula. So the first point I want to make is that most of us probably don't know the Rebbe's approach to this. I mean, I can give you my Mekamius. You could look, for example, and I worked a lot in researching this because it's negated to my work. So if you look, for example, in Chelik Yud Gimel, if you want to write it down, page 230, look at the ha'aras there, you'll get a very clear picture of the Rebbe's approach. But the main point I want to make is this, that each one of us, each one in our own way, whether it's people, you have 5 people you can reach, or 1 person you can reach, or 1 million people you can reach today with technology, I believe the Ha'ira of Yutas Kislev, at least one of them is this. What are you doing using your talents and your skills and your reach to people of bringing Chassidus to them in a way that's relevant, and they want to embrace it because not out of Kabbalah sale alone, because they see it's meaningful, they see it's personal. That to me is the Yutas Kislev Ha'ira. I will do my part, whatever I can do, but I think that's, we want to go away with chlotas. I think that's a question everybody has to ask themselves. The Alter Rebbe, the Rabbeim, were Moshe Nefesh for Chassidus. So what are we doing for Chassidus? Now, yes, of course, you go to shir, you go to say the Chassidus, you learn a shir every day. Beautiful. Learn more Chassidus, the more the merrier. But you have to do something with this. Also, yafutzu ma'inasecha chutza. It's not just learning Chassidus, it's spreading Chassidus. That was the whole point. The Alter Rebbe, the Kitrug L'mayla on the Alter Rebbe wasn't just that he learned Chassidus, is that he was teaching Chassidus, that he was explaining it, the Chabad, he was bringing it to Chutzah. That was the Kitrug. Primus Atera was always learned by Yechidus Gula, but it didn't go to Chutzah. Well, the whole challenge was that they saw Chassidus Valgren on the floor, and that's when the Alter Rebbe gave the mashal of the Ben Chela. In other words, it's about bringing it outward. So the only way you can celebrate this Kislev properly is bringing Chassidus outward. Chutzah she'en chutzah memeno. And there's no question that today, with technology and all the tools we have, the pipelines are out there. It doesn't take much. So I say that one hachlata we have to make is, what are you going to do to bring Chassidus a little more to chutzah than it was till now? Obviously, that also means you have to learn properly yourself. You can't explain it to someone else if you don't know it yourself. So obviously it goes hand in hand. Like the Alter Rebbe says in the Hakdama of Tanya, Meir ein shnei mavaya, that when you teach others, you also get illuminated. So that to me is a critical hira. Especially the Rebbe said that we have to do something to bring Mashiach to Talmud Kent. What better way? Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, that never changed. We never have another directive for Mashiach, how you bring Mashiach, through Yifutzim Enesecha Chutza. Now, of course, there's many, many ways to do it, and each of you have to find your way of doing it, but that, to me, is a no-brainer. If we don't go away with just Kislev with that, I'd like to know what Ha'ira you're going away with, because that's like the core of the very day. This mitzvah sayem of Yutas Kislev is Yifutzim Enesecha Chutza. The Rebbe Rashab says, Bamir, as the Ikki Yifutzim Enesecha Chutza, angeheben Yutas Kislev. That's what he says, because that's when it became the license. Alter Rebbe was vindicated, and that's when the real Yifutzim Enesecha Chutza spread. Now, of course, today it's completely different level. You can reach places that we never reached before, both bekamus and be'echus. So nobody can tell anybody what to do today or anytime. That's my humble suggestion of Yutas Kislev Achlota, and figure it out. And if you can't do it, figure it out yourself. Talk to Mashpia, find a chaver, do 2 people together. It's always easier. Tev Shnayim Echad. We have 2 people. You have a synergy of 2 or more. And I don't. If I could be of any help, if anybody wants to discuss any ideas, this is my mikzeh. This is what I do. I'd be happy to discuss it. But there's no excuses. There's absolute possibility for every one of you in your own way. Ein day saying Shabbos, everybody has different talents. This one has a talent to write. This one has a talent to speak. This one can teach. This one can conceive of ideas. This one knows how to market. And remember the Rebbe once wrote to one of the Moisdes, he wrote, Kimedumani haloshen hu yafutzu v'lo yatfisu ma'nesecha chutza. You hear? Yafutsu, not yatfisu. The difference? Yatfisu means printing books and putting them on a shelf, and maybe no one will even look at them. And yafutsu means marketing and distributing it. is the difference basically between success and failure. That's what the difference is. If you go to any, let's learn from Elam Haza. If you go to any company and you say there's a great production department, but there's no marketing and no distribution and no sales, you tell me what kind of business this is going to be. If you have in a warehouse all the products, it's very nice, but that's not how it works. In this world, it's called distribution. I always say when people come to me for advice about publishing or books, I don't even want to talk to them about the teichen. They won't want to talk about teichen. I have the best teichen. I said, you can have the best teichen, but if it's sitting on a shelf and no one looks at it, it means nothing. And you have to distribute. What's your distribution plan? And everybody says the same thing. The inexperienced will say, first I'll produce it, then I'll figure it out. No, it doesn't work that way. In Chassidus, there's a lashon, Sheirish HaKelim is higher than Sheirish HaEris. You first figure out where your kelim are before you go produce the Eris. First, you need to know your target audience before you give a shir. You don't start giving a shir, I'm going to give a shir in Chassidus, and then I'm going to figure out who's fits. It's the other way around. Figure out who's listening to you, and then fit what you're saying to them. That's what a mashpia does. But we are good at mamshich zayin eris, We know how to throw leaflets out of a plane. Like you could throw out 1 billion leaflets. Question is how many people are picking it up. We have no clue because we haven't developed that department. I can tell you, this is, again, my work. I know how difficult it is. And that's why Chassidus still reaches hundreds of thousands. Millions? I doubt it. I'm not saying millions have not maybe heard the word, but also millions is not billions. So I know, we also know we're not a numbers game. We all know Nefesh Achas Yisrael. You save one Jew, you save the world. So I'm not denying that. But at the same time, numbers count as well. If you want Mola Oretz Deis Hashem, Berevam Hades Melech, you better have some numbers. You can't just have 2 people knowing that God exists. You want the world to know. So these are some of my, it's 1 o'clock, so the Nadish hour ended. Now we can go back to a little more normalcy. Actually, this is good, right? This is the way we should be going, right? No Caleb? That's funny. Okay. And I thought I was talking about Caleb, but okay. Maybe you got to get off your butt and figure out what to do. Well, okay. Let me ask you something. If I was speaking about light bulbs and selling, let's say, cell phones, would you know what Kalim are? Really? Okay, so then you're a holy man. In this business world, there's a thing called selling product, right? That concept, We have to look at Chassidus like a product. I don't mean in a business sense. I'm not talking about making money, but you have to look at it like it's a commodity. Does it have value? How do you bring that value to a human being? That's the bottom line. That's the challenge. If somebody doesn't feel they know how to do that, I would say that means they don't know what the product is. We're speaking about Yutas Kislev, Chassidus, so you need to know there's a product here. It's called Chassidus. Again, product, I don't mean to demean it. I don't mean it in a, it's a valuable product. And there's an audience you want to bring it to. That's, to me, your futsu, my nesecha chutza means, my nesecha is the product, the well springs of Chassidus. Chutza is the market, the people, and your futsu is the distribution. Our challenge, we don't need to create Chassidus. We have it from the Rabbeim. We may need to translate it. We need to adapt it. We also, the chutzah we don't have to create. It's out there. It's 8 billion people on this planet, divided by different segments. And then we have one thing. We are distributors. We have to figure out how do you bring it to as many people as possible, that they should appreciate the value. That's the value proposition. That's the business proposal I'm putting on the table here. It's everywhere, wherever you go. There's chutzah and Crown Heights too, plenty of it. Now, there's some people, they may not say it openly, they say, I don't believe in this product. I don't believe you can bring it to people. There are people that say that. I'm not one of them, so I'm not even going to recognize that. Those people that don't believe in the product, they should go into another business. Fine. So go sell hamburgers. I mean, or shoes. Or whatever it is. But if you do believe in the product, then you have to figure out how can you bring it to people in a way that's valuable. Now, I know a lot of people also say, I believe in the product, but it's only for Chassidus Shidden. You're not going to bring Ava V'yira and Tanya Kadisha to the secular world. Now, I can't accept that. To me, your Futzman Secha Chutza, it contradicts that. Especially once the Rebbe said, Chutza Shein Chutza Mimenu. Chutza doesn't just mean Midis Legabe Mechin or Chitzenius Atik Legabe Primius Atik. So no, this is not a strategic meeting right now, but I'm laying out what I think should be done next. So if it is a bomb, I'll tell you what you have to do. Find a few people that you're close with and sit and strategize and figure out, okay, what can we do? That's what I would suggest. That's what I meant getting off you, but I didn't mean you. I meant to say that's the next step. I try my best in the work I do in doing this. Have I succeeded? Minimally. I would say in some areas I succeeded. A lot of areas I've not. In the big scale, no. The big scale, you'll know about it if we reach the big scale, because it'll be headlines everywhere. It says Mashiach will be in the Gazette, the Rebbe would say, from Teir Shalom. That Mashiach comes, all the newspapers will write about it. If the newspapers don't write about it, it means it didn't come. It means it's an event that only happened in someone's basement. You want it to be known. Maybe you need business-minded people to apply business principles to this, to Chassidus and Mashiach. Because I think spiritual people are too idealistic. They don't really get the distribution side of it. That's what I'm thinking right now. I'm looking at Shlomo Greenwald here, by the way, because he's the master. All our hopes are on you now. There we go. What do you think? Everything you touch, it turns into gold. At some point, we have to find a scapegoat to blame everything on. So. L'chaim. I hope you don't mind my venting, but I was serious actually. It wasn't a joke. Oh, but it was going till now? Going till now?